This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been driving trucks for nearly 23 years. It's a solitary life, but it suited me. I've seen most of the continental United States from behind a windshield, dealt with everything from blizzards to tornadoes, and handled just about every mechanical failure you can imagine. But what happened to me last October on Highway 87 in Montana, well, I still can't explain it. I'm not a superstitious man, but I don't have a rational explanation for what I experienced either. I was hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Great Falls to Billings. Pretty routine run, one I'd done dozens of times before. It was around 9 in the evening, already pitch black on that stretch of highway. There's not much out there, just miles of open road, cutting through empty country with the occasional small town or gas station. The night was clear but moonless, making the darkness feel especially heavy. About an hour into my drive, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual about that, except they were following unusually close. I could make out it was an old pickup truck, maybe from the 70s or 80s, and it was practically riding my bumper despite the fact I was doing about 65. It was annoying, but I figured they'd eventually pass me or turn off somewhere. For 20 minutes, this truck stayed right on my tail. I slowed down to let them pass, but they just slowed down too. I sped up, they sped up. It was starting to make me nervous. The highway was empty except for us, and this behavior felt deliberate, threatening even. Then something happened that I still can't wrap my head around. I looked in my mirror and the truck was gone, just vanished. I felt relieved for about 10 seconds until I spotted something ahead on the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, I could see it was the same damn pickup truck, now parked on the side of the highway. There's no way it could have gotten ahead of me that quickly. It was physically impossible. Standing beside it was a man. Even from a distance, something looked wrong about him. He was waving his arms frantically, clearly trying to flag me down. Now, in the trucking community, there's an unspoken code about helping stranded motorists, especially in remote areas. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep driving. Maybe it was how he'd been following me, or maybe it was something about his silhouette in my headlights, but everything felt wrong. Still, 23 years of stopping for people in trouble overrode my gut feeling. I slowed down and pulled over about 50 feet ahead of his truck. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. In my side mirror, I could see him walking toward my rig. His gait was off, stiff and jerky, like someone who'd been sitting too long. I rolled my window down just a crack, enough to call out but not enough for anyone to reach in. "You need help?" I yelled out. He stopped about 20 feet from my cab. In my side mirror, I could see him more clearly now, and my blood ran cold. He was wearing tattered clothes that looked decades old, but it was his face that made my stomach turn. It was gaunt, almost skull-like, with deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect my headlights like an animal's. His skin had a gray, waxy look to it, not like any living person I'd ever seen. "Need a ride?" he called back, his voice raspy and thin, like wind through dead leaves. "Just up the road." I'm not proud of what I did next, but self-preservation kicked in. I muttered, "Sorry, man," and put my truck in gear. As I started to pull away, he suddenly sprinted toward my cab with inhuman speed. I caught a glimpse of his face contorted with rage, mouth open impossibly wide, showing blackened teeth. He slammed his hands against my door as I accelerated, leaving him behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there. I pushed my rig as fast as it would go, watching my mirrors the whole time. There was no sign of him or the pickup truck following me. About 20 miles down the road, there was a truck stop, Miller's, if anyone knows it. I pulled in, still shaking, and decided to grab a coffee and collect myself. Inside, there were a few other truckers sitting at the counter. I must have looked like hell because one of them, an older guy with a gray beard, asked if I was all right. I hesitated before saying anything. Truckers are a practical bunch, not given to ghost stories. But I needed to tell someone what happened, so I described my encounter. The place went quiet. The bearded trucker exchanged looks with the others. It was the kind of silence that tells you everyone knows something you don't. "You ran into the ghost of Highway 87, he finally said, not a hint of amusement in his voice. "You're lucky you didn't stop for him." Another driver, a woman probably in her 50s, nodded. "He's been spotted on and off for years, always at night, always trying to get people to stop." "What happens if you do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "People disappear," the bearded trucker said simply. "Or they end up dead in their vehicles, looking like they aged 50 years overnight. Highway Patrol doesn't even investigate anymore. They write it off as heart attacks or exposure." I wanted to dismiss it as bullshit, some local legend they tell newcomers, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen, and the grave expressions on their faces didn't suggest they were pulling my leg. I finished my coffee and headed back to my truck, feeling marginally better but still uneasy. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and was about to start the engine when I heard it, a light tapping on my passenger window. I froze. The tapping came again, more insistent. Slowly, I turned to look. He was standing there, the same hollow-eyed figure from the highway. Up close, he looked even less human. His skin was pulled tight over his cheekbones, and his eyes were sunken black pits. But it was his expression that terrified me the most, a mixture of pleading and hunger. "Help me, please," he said, his voice somehow coming through the glass clearly, despite being barely above a whisper. "I just need a ride." I'm not ashamed to say I panicked. I started the engine and tore out of that parking lot like the devil himself was after me. In my mirrors, I could see him standing there, watching me go. He didn't chase after me this time, just stood perfectly still until I couldn't see him anymore. I drove for another hour, pushing well over the speed limit before I felt safe enough to slow down. I stopped at a diner in a small town whose name I don't even remember. It was nearly empty at that hour, just a couple of locals and the waitress. I ordered food I couldn't eat, and coffee I definitely needed. I was staring out the window at my truck in the parking lot when I saw movement in the shadows behind it. At first, I thought it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. But then he stepped into the glow of the parking lot lights, the same figure, standing perfectly still, staring at the diner window, staring at me. The waitress must have noticed my expression because she came over and asked if everything was all right. When I didn't answer, she followed my gaze to the parking lot. "Do you see him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "By my truck?" She squinted, looking where I was pointing, then shook her head. "There's nobody out there, honey, just your rig." But he was there. I could see him as clearly as I could see her. He raised one hand slowly and beckoned to me. I paid my bill and left through the back door, circling around to my truck from the other side. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified I'd find him right behind me, but I made it to my cab without incident. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw him still standing in the same spot, turning to watch me leave. I drove straight through to the next major truck stop, a big, Commercial one with lots of people around. I figured I'd be safer with other drivers nearby. I was beyond exhausted, having been awake for nearly 20 hours at that point, but I was too afraid to sleep. In the lounge area, I found a group of older drivers playing cards. When I asked if any of them had heard about strange experiences on Highway 87, they got quiet, just like at the previous stop. One of them, a man who introduced himself as Earl and said he'd been driving that route for 30 years, took me aside. "There's a story," he said quietly. "Goes back to the 80s. A man was killed on that highway, hit and run. Supposedly dozens of drivers passed him as he lay dying on the roadside, calling for help. By the time someone finally stopped, he was already gone." "And now he haunts the highway?" I asked, trying not to sound skeptical despite what I'd seen. Earl nodded. "That's what they say. He flags down trucks, begging for help. The ones who stop," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "What happens to them?" I pressed. "Most just disappear. Their trucks are found abandoned. A few make it back, but they're never the same. They talk about being trapped somewhere dark, somewhere cold, with others who stopped before them. They describe it like being slowly drained of something, not just blood, but something deeper." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the lounge until dawn, then got back on the road. I completed my delivery in Billings and immediately requested routes that would keep me away from Montana. My dispatcher thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. It's been 4 months since that night. I haven't been back to Highway 87, but sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my mirror. A pair of headlights following too close. Or I'll see a figure standing on the shoulder up ahead, arm raised to flag me down. Even in states thousands of miles from Montana. I don't stop anymore. Not for anyone. I can't take the chance. The worst part is the dreams. I dream about him standing in an endless darkness, surrounded by others, hollow-eyed figures like himself. Sometimes I hear him whispering, "I just need a ride, just a little help." And in the dreams, I always stop for him. I always let him in. I don't know if what happened to me was supernatural or if I had some kind of breakdown on that lonely stretch of highway. All I know is that I've changed. There's a coldness in me now, a constant looking over my shoulder. I keep driving because it's all I know how to do, but the open road doesn't feel like freedom anymore. And sometimes, when I pass someone broken down on the shoulder, someone genuinely in need of help, I see their faces in my rearview mirror as I drive past. The confusion, the disappointment, the realization that no one is going to stop for them either. I wonder if that's how it started for him too. Story 2. I was hauling a load of industrial parts from Tulsa to Amarillo, a route I've driven dozens of times. Nothing special about it. The dispatcher had me on a tight schedule, so I was pushing it a bit, driving through the night to make my morning delivery. Around 1:30 in the morning, I hit that long stretch of highway between Woodward and Shattuck. You know the one if you've ever driven through western Oklahoma. Miles of nothing but plains and the occasional fence post. It was dead quiet that night. Usually I'd pass another truck every few minutes, but I hadn't seen headlights for almost an hour. Just me, my high beams cutting through the darkness, and some old Johnny Cash playing low on the radio. The moon was almost full, casting this eerie bluish light across the fields on either side of the road. I've got this rule I've stuck to my entire career: never pick up hitchhikers. Not worth the risk these days. But when I spotted this guy standing on the shoulder about 20 miles outside of Shattuck, something felt different. He wasn't thumbing for a ride, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, staring down the road like he was waiting for someone. Wearing this faded jean jacket and a red baseball cap pulled low over his face. I still don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was how empty the road was, or how cold the night had gotten. Whatever it was, I found myself hitting the brakes and pulling onto the shoulder about 50 feet ahead of him. I watched in my side mirror as he walked up to the passenger door. He didn't rush, didn't seem excited to get a ride, just this steady walk, like he knew I'd be stopping for him all along. When he got closer, I could see his face in the glow from my cab lights. Young guy, maybe mid-20s, but with this exhausted look. Pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. "Where you headed?" I asked as he climbed in. "Anywhere away from here," he said. His voice was quiet, but not nervous. "Just need to get away from this area." I nodded and pulled back onto the highway. "I can take you as far as Shattuck. That work?" He just nodded, staring straight ahead through the windshield. For the first 20 minutes or so, we didn't talk much. He thanked me for stopping, said his name was Alex. I told him mine, Joe Miller. He didn't have any bags with him, which seemed odd for someone hitchhiking, but I didn't ask about it. Not my business why he was out there. After a while, he started asking me about trucking. Normal stuff at first, how long I'd been driving, what kind of loads I hauled, that sort of thing. But then the conversation took this weird turn. "You ever see anything strange out here at night, Joe?" he asked, still staring straight ahead. "How do you mean?" "You know," he said, finally turning to look at me. "Something you couldn't explain. Something that shouldn't be possible." I shrugged it off. "Roads play tricks on your eyes when you've been driving too long. Makes you see things that aren't there." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what they always say." The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, like he knew something I didn't. "You know about the disappearances on this stretch, right?" he asked. "What disappearances?" "Truckers. Every few years, a driver goes missing along this highway. No accident, no breakdown. They just vanish. Trucks found on the shoulder, engines running, but no driver. Like they stepped out and never came back." I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "Never heard about that." "You wouldn't have. They keep it quiet. Bad for business, I guess." He was looking out his window now. My brother was one of them. That's when I started feeling really uneasy. Not just because of what he was saying, but because of how calm he was saying it. Like he was discussing the weather. "Your brother was a trucker?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No. We were driving through here about 3 years ago. Middle of the night, just like this. He was behind the wheel. I fell asleep for a bit, and when I woke up, the car was on the shoulder, engine running, headlights on, but Mike was gone." I swallowed hard. "People don't just vanish, man." That's what I thought. That's what everyone thought. He turned to look at me again. "We had a fight before I fell asleep. Nothing serious, just brothers being brothers. I always wondered if he pulled over to cool off, maybe went for a walk, but he would have come back." "Did the police ever find anything?" "They looked for 2 weeks, search parties, helicopters, the works, nothing, like he just disappeared into thin air." He paused. "But right before I woke up, I remember hearing this sound, this weird humming, like electricity but deeper. Could feel it in my chest." I was getting seriously creeped out now. The guy seemed genuinely upset, but something about his story wasn't sitting right with me. "Look, man, I'm sorry about your brother, but I think I'm gonna drop you at the next gas station we see, all right?" He nodded, like he was expecting that response. "Sure, Joe, no problem." We drove in silence for a few minutes. The dashboard clock read 2:17 in the morning. The road stretched out in front of us, empty and dark. I kept glancing over at him, but he just stared out the windshield, completely still. That's when it happened. Far ahead, maybe half a mile down the road, I saw headlights coming straight at us in our lane. High beams, blinding white, moving fast. Jesus Christ, I muttered, slowing down and moving toward the shoulder. But the headlights kept coming, heading straight for us. I laid on the horn, flashed my lights, but the oncoming vehicle didn't change course. It was going to hit us head on. At the last second, I cranked the wheel hard to the right, bracing for impact, yelling something. I don't even remember what. But instead of the crash I was expecting, the headlights just passed through us, like they weren't even there. No vehicle, no sound, just these blinding lights that moved right through my truck like a ghost. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I pulled onto the shoulder and slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. When I turned to look at my passenger, to ask if he'd seen what I'd seen, the seat was empty. He was gone. Completely gone. I'm not talking about him jumping out while I was distracted. The truck was still moving at over 50 miles per hour when those lights came at us. The door was closed. The seat belt was still fastened. The empty seat belt lying flat across the empty seat like it had never been used. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Then I did what any rational person would do. I checked the entire cab, looked behind the seats, checked the sleeper berth. Nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been there with me. I got out of the truck, my legs shaking so bad I could barely stand, checked underneath, all around the truck, used my flashlight to search the ditches on both sides of the highway. Nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt on the shoulder, no sign of anyone walking away. He had literally vanished into thin air. I got back in my truck and drove, fast. Didn't stop until I reached a truck stop outside of Shattuck. The place was nearly empty, just an old guy behind the counter at the attached diner and a couple of other drivers sleeping in their rigs. I went inside, ordered coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated a passenger? But it had felt so real. The conversation, his voice, his face, it was all so clear in my mind. I asked the guy at the counter if anyone had reported strange things happening on that stretch of highway. He gave me a funny look and said no, not that he knew of. Then he asked if I was okay, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the windows into the dark parking lot, I expected to see him standing there in his faded jean jacket and red cap, but there was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat in that diner until sunrise, drinking cup after cup of coffee, jumping at every sound. When it was finally light outside, I finished my delivery in Amarillo and immediately called my dispatcher to tell him I needed a few days off. It's been nearly a week now, and I still can't explain what happened that night. I've looked up missing persons reports for the area, searched for any trucker disappearances along that highway, found nothing concrete, just a few forum posts from people claiming similar experiences. Drivers going missing for hours, then turning up miles away with no memory of how they got there. Strange lights seen hovering over the fields. The usual stuff you'd expect from conspiracy websites. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that something is out there on that highway. Something that waits in the darkness. Something that knows how to get inside your head, make you break your own rules. Something that feeds on fear and loneliness. I've got another run to Amarillo next week. My dispatcher says I can take a different route if I want, but it'll add 3 hours to the drive. Part of me wants to take the longer route, never drive that stretch of highway again. But another part of me wants to go back, to see if he's still there, waiting for another ride, to get answers about what happened. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do know one thing. If I take that highway again and see someone standing on the shoulder, I'm not stopping, not for anything. Because I'm pretty sure that the next driver who picks up that hitchhiker won't be as lucky as I was. Next time, it might be my empty truck they find on the side of the road, engine running, no driver in sight. And the worst part? I can't stop thinking about what he said about his brother, about hearing that humming sound right before he disappeared. Because just after those headlights passed through us, just before I realized he was gone, I heard it too. That deep, electrical hum, so low I could feel it in my chest. It's the last thing I remember before I found myself alone in that truck. Story 3. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years. Chicago to LA, Boston to Miami, Seattle to San Diego. You name a route, I've probably hauled freight on it. The open road becomes a second home when you've been behind the wheel as long as I have. But what happened to me last October on Route 66, I still can't explain it. I haven't slept right since. It was a routine haul, Chicago to Los Angeles with a trailer full of electronics. Nothing special. I'd made this run dozens of times before. Left Chicago around 3 in the afternoon, planning to drive through the night and catch some sleep at a truck stop in New Mexico the next day. The weather was good, traffic was light, and my rig was running smooth. Just another job. Around midnight, I hit that long, empty stretch of Route 66 in western Oklahoma. You know the type. Miles of nothing but darkness on either side, the occasional cactus or scrub brush visible in your headlights, and maybe one car passing by every half hour. It's usually peaceful. I had the radio tuned to some late-night talk show, the cab was warm, and I had a thermos of coffee keeping me company. That's when things started getting weird. First, the radio cut out. Not gradually with the usual fade and static as you leave a station's range. It just suddenly died and was replaced by this harsh, grating static that made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried changing stations, but every frequency was the same wall of noise. I turned it off. The silence felt wrong somehow, too complete. Even with my engine running and the hum of tires on asphalt, it felt like I was driving through a vacuum. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Now, I'm used to seeing other vehicles on the road, even at odd hours. Long-haul truckers, night owls, people trying to make good time while the highways are empty. But something about these lights immediately put me on edge. They were too bright, unnaturally bright, and they were approaching fast. Way too fast for this 2-lane stretch with its curves and dips. Within seconds, the vehicle was right on my tail. I could barely see anything in my mirrors except those blinding lights. They were so intense, they filled my cab with a harsh white glow. I flashed my brake lights as a warning, thinking maybe the driver didn't realize how close they were, but that did nothing. The vehicle kept pace, staying right on my bumper. I sped up to 75, then 80. They matched me. I slowed, down to 55, hoping they'd pass. They slowed down too, staying right behind me, those lights burning into my mirrors. I felt sweat beading on my forehead. 20 years on the road, and I'd never felt threatened like this. Was it road rage? Some kind of sick game? I reached for my CB radio to see if any other truckers were nearby, but all I got was the same harsh static I'd heard on the regular radio. Up ahead, I could see a sharp curve approaching, one of those bends where the highway wraps around a hill. I knew I'd have to brake for it. I hit my turn signal early, hoping the driver behind would take the hint and back off. They didn't. As the curve got closer, I had no choice. I hit my brakes hard, felt my trailer shudder behind me. The vehicle behind me, which I could now see, was another semi, a massive black Peterbilt, swerved violently into the oncoming lane and accelerated to pass me. As it pulled alongside, I got my first good look at it. The truck was all wrong. Pitch black, with no company logos, no dot numbers, nothing. Just glossy black paint that seemed to absorb the light around it. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like empty voids. But the grille, God, the grille, it was this massive chrome thing, polished to a mirror finish. And in that chrome, I could see my own face reflected back at me, pale and scared under the dome light of my cab. The black truck pulled ahead of me as we entered the curve, its taillights briefly illuminating the road ahead. Then, impossibly, it was gone. Not just ahead of me or out of sight, completely gone. The road straightened out beyond the curve, giving me a clear view for at least half a mile. There was nothing there, no taillights disappearing into the distance. The truck had vanished. I pulled over immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the wheel. I sat there on the shoulder, engine idling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My logical mind tried to find explanations. Maybe there was a turnoff I hadn't noticed, or the truck had killed its lights for some reason. But I knew what I'd seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen. After about 10 minutes of sitting there, heart hammering in my chest, I decided to continue. What else could I do? I was in the middle of nowhere, and my delivery deadline wasn't going to wait. I pulled back onto the highway, constantly checking my mirrors for those blinding headlights. The road remained empty behind me. For about 20 minutes I drove in silence, jumping at every shadow at the edge of my headlights. Then my radio suddenly crackled to life by itself. At first, it was just static, but then a woman's voice broke through. She sounded terrified, her words coming between gasps. "Please, help me. He's coming. He's always coming." I nearly drove off the road. The voice was so clear, so desperate, it didn't sound like a radio broadcast at all. It sounded like someone was sitting in the passenger seat next to me. "Hello?" I said, even though I knew the radio was one way. "Who is this? Where are you?" The static returned, drowning out any response. I fiddled with the dial, trying to get the voice back, but there was nothing. That's when I saw the headlights again. This time, they were coming toward me from the opposite direction. Like before, they were impossibly bright, growing rapidly as whatever it was sped toward me. I gripped the wheel tightly, staying in my lane, prepared for the vehicle to pass. The lights got brighter and brighter until I was nearly blinded. I squinted, trying to keep my eyes on the road. At the last second, just as the vehicle should have passed me, the lights simply winked out. Not dimmed or passed by. They disappeared. One moment they were there, the next gone, leaving me blinking at sudden darkness. And there, in the middle of my lane, illuminated in my headlights, was a figure, a person, standing perfectly still on the yellow line. Tall and impossibly thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned black coat that reached to the ground. On their head was a wide-brimmed black hat that cast a shadow over their face, but what froze the blood in my veins was their arm, extended straight out, pointing directly at me as I approached. I hit the brakes instinctively, my trailer fishtailing slightly behind me. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept pointing at me as my truck skidded toward it. At the last possible second, when I was sure I was about to hit them, the figure dissolved. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. Like smoke being blown away by the wind, The figure simply dispersed into the darkness. I came to a complete stop in the middle of the highway, my high beams illuminating nothing but empty road ahead. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. I couldn't move, couldn't think, just sat there, engine idling, staring at the spot where the figure had been. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to put the truck in gear and continue driving. I didn't stop again until I reached a well-lit truck stop in Tucumcari, New Mexico, just as the sun was coming up. I parked, locked myself in my cab, and finally let the terror I'd been holding back wash over me. I was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. I called my dispatcher and made up some story about feeling sick, needing a day to recover. I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? I spent the day at that truck stop, talking to other drivers, trying to find anyone who might have heard similar stories about Route 66. Most just gave me strange looks or laughed it off. But one old-timer, a guy who must have been in his 70s, got real quiet when I described the black truck. "There's stories," he said, keeping his voice low. "Been stories for decades about a phantom truck on that stretch. Some say it's a driver who died in a horrible crash back in the 60s, doomed to drive that same route forever. Others say it's something that was never human to begin with, just wears the shape of a truck because that's what belongs on the highway." "What about the figure?" I asked. "The person in the black coat?" The old driver just shook his head. "Never heard that part before. Maybe it's getting worse. Or maybe it's taken a special interest in you." I finished my haul to Los Angeles 2 days late. My company wasn't happy, but I managed to keep my job. I've made the run a few more times since then, but I always take the interstate now, avoiding Route 66 entirely. I've also started driving exclusively during daylight hours. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Sometimes, when I'm driving on completely different routes, hundreds of miles from Oklahoma, I'll catch a glimpse of something black in my rearview mirror, just for a second, and my radio will briefly hiss with static. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know what the black truck was, or who the figure in the road was, or whose voice I heard on the radio. But I know it was real, and I know somehow that it's not finished with me. Every time I get behind the wheel now, I can't help but check my mirrors more often than necessary, watching for those blinding headlights to appear again. Because deep down, I know they will. Somewhere out there on the empty highways of America, that phantom truck is still driving, and sooner or later, our paths are going to cross again. Story 4. I still can't believe what happened last Wednesday night. I've been trying to make sense of it for days now, but I can't find any logical explanation. I'm not the type who believes in the supernatural. I've always been practical, skeptical even. But what happened on that drive home has completely shaken my world. I work at Mel's Diner, this small place just off Route 16. Nothing fancy, just your typical greasy spoon where truckers and night owls come for coffee and pancakes at odd hours. I usually work the evening shift, which means I don't get off until around 11 at night. The drive home is about an hour long, mostly on empty back roads through wooded areas. I've made this drive hundreds of times without incident. That night, I finished my shift around 11:15. It had been a slow night, just a few regulars and a family passing through town. I was exhausted after a double shift. Carol had called in sick, so I covered for her. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The weather wasn't great. It had been drizzling on and off all evening, and a light fog was starting to roll in. Nothing too bad, but enough to make me grip the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The radio was playing some late-night talk show. I wasn't really listening, just needed some background noise to keep me alert. About 20 minutes into my drive, I was on a particularly desolate stretch of highway. The nearest town was miles away, and there were no streetlights, just the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness and fog. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road with his thumb out. My first instinct was to keep driving. I never pick up hitchhikers. It's just not safe, especially at night on a deserted road. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was because the fog was getting thicker, or maybe it was because I'd been in that guy's shoes once when my car broke down miles from anywhere. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling over. The man approached my passenger window, and I rolled it down just enough to hear him. He was tall, probably 6 foot something, with dark hair that hung slightly over his eyes. His skin was weirdly pale, almost like he hadn't seen the sun in weeks. He wore this worn leather jacket that had seen better days, jeans and boots. Nothing too unusual, but there was something about him that seemed off. "Car trouble," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My phone's dead too. Been standing here for almost an hour." I hesitated for a second, then unlocked the door. "Where are you headed?" I asked as he slid into the passenger seat. "Just up ahead a few miles," he said. "Name's Daniel, by the way." "Jacob," I replied, pulling back onto the empty road. Now that he was in my car, I noticed he didn't have any bags or belongings with him. Strange for someone whose car supposedly broke down. Wouldn't he at least have a phone charger or something? But I didn't question it. The fog was getting thicker by the minute, and I was focused on driving. "Thanks for stopping," Daniel said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Not many people would these days." "No problem," I mumbled, though a part of me was already regretting my decision. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The fog was now so thick I had to slow down to about 40 miles per hour. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of gray in front of us. "So, what brings you out here so late?" I finally asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I'm looking for someone." Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced over at him, but he was still staring straight ahead, his profile illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Oh yeah? Family member?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He shook his head slightly. "No, just someone I need to find." I didn't press further. The atmosphere in the car had become tense, and I was starting to regret my decision to pick him up. To distract myself, I reached over to turn up the radio. That's when things got weirder. The talk show I'd been half listening to suddenly cut to static. I fiddled with the dial, but every station was the same, just crackling white noise. I finally turned it off, and the silence felt even heavier than before. "Sorry about that," I said, forcing a laugh. "Radio reception out here is terrible." Daniel didn't respond. He was now looking out his window, his breath fogging up the glass. I noticed his hands were resting on his knees, and they looked wrong somehow. Too pale, with long fingers that never seemed to move. We were approaching a small wooden bridge that crosses over Sawmill Creek. It's not much, just a narrow, one-lane structure that's probably been there since the 50s. Local legend says it's haunted, but that's just small-town folklore. At least, that's what I always thought. As we got closer to the bridge, Daniel became more alert, sitting up straighter in his seat. I could feel him watching me now, and it took everything in me not to look over at him. The fog had become so thick that I could barely see the bridge until we were right on top of it. The wooden planks creaked and groaned beneath the weight of my car. And then we were across. Just as I was about to accelerate, Daniel suddenly spoke. "This is the spot," he said. "I need to get out here." I was confused. There was nothing around. No houses, no gas stations, just woods and the empty road stretching ahead and behind us. "Are you sure?" "There's nothing here," I said, but I was already pulling over, relieved at the prospect of him leaving my car. "This is where I need to be," he insisted. I stopped the car and he opened the door. The interior light came on, and for a split second, I thought I saw something strange about his appearance, like his features weren't quite solid. But I blinked, and he looked normal again. "Thanks for the ride, Jacob," he said as he got out. "Be careful on these roads. Not everyone makes it home." Before I could respond, he shut the door and walked toward the bridge we had just crossed. I sat there for a moment, watching him through my rearview mirror. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't, casting a shadow under the moonlight. I put my car in drive and got out of there as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel standing in the middle of the road. But there was nothing, just fog swallowing the asphalt behind me. About 15 minutes later, I came across a small 24-hour diner called Ruby's. I wasn't scheduled to be back at work until the afternoon, but I needed to stop somewhere, to be around people and bright lights. My hands were shaking as I pulled into the parking lot. Inside, there were only a few customers, a truck driver at the counter and an elderly couple in a booth. I took a seat at the counter and ordered a coffee from the waitress, a middle-aged woman with dyed red hair whose name tag read Betty. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said as she poured my coffee. I laughed nervously. "Just tired, been a long night." I don't know why I decided to tell her, but something about her kind face made me trust her. Actually, I picked up a hitchhiker back near Sawmill Bridge. Guy named Daniel. Tall, dark hair, pale skin, leather jacket. Kinda weird. He had me drop him off right after the bridge, but there's nothing there. Just thought it was strange. The coffee pot in Betty's hand froze mid-air. Her face went white, and she set the pot down with a shaking hand. "What?" I asked, suddenly alarmed by her reaction. "That bridge," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was an accident there 5 years ago. A man was walking along the road at night when he was hit by a car. The driver was drunk, never even stopped. By the time someone found him, he was gone." My mouth went dry. "What was his name?" Betty looked me straight in the eyes. "Daniel Marshall. Tall guy, dark hair. Always wore this old leather jacket his dad had given him." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "That's impossible. I just gave him a ride." Betty shook her head slowly. "You're not the first. There's a local legend about Daniel. They say his spirit hitchhikes along that road, always asking to be let out near the bridge. Some say he's still looking for the driver who hit him. Others think he's just trying to find his way home." I didn't finish my coffee. I thanked Betty, left some money on the counter, and practically ran back to my car. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel sitting in my back seat. When I finally got home, I went straight to my computer and searched for Daniel Marshall Accident Sawmill Bridge. There it was, a news article from 5 years ago about a hit and run that killed a 28-year-old man. The grainy photo showed a tall, dark-haired man with a slight smile. He was wearing a leather jacket. I haven't driven that route since. I take the long way to work now, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid that bridge. I still work the late shift at the diner, but every time I get in my car to drive home, I check the back seat first. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the fog rolls in, I think I see a figure standing on the side of the road with his thumb out. I don't stop anymore, but I can't help but wonder, what was Daniel looking for? Was he searching for the person who killed him? Or was he just trying to find his way back to wherever it is we go when we die? I don't have any answers. All I know is that for a few minutes on that foggy night, I shared my car with something that wasn't quite human, a spirit trapped between worlds, eternally searching. And every time I pass a lone figure on a dark, empty road, I can't help but wonder if they're really there at all. Story 5. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not even sure if writing it down will help, but I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. What happened on that cruise? Ship wasn't normal, and I don't think I'll ever be the same. Last June, I booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise on the SS Obsidian. It was supposed to be my fresh start after breaking up with Mark after 6 years together. 6 years down the drain. He cheated with his coworker. Such a cliché, right? I was mentally exhausted from my photography job in New York. Weddings mostly, which felt particularly cruel after the breakup. So I figured a luxury cruise would help me reset. The Obsidian looked absolutely stunning in the brochures. All gleaming surfaces, infinity pools, and 5-star restaurants. When I boarded in New Orleans, I was actually impressed that it lived up to the pictures. The ship was massive, with these beautiful dark wood accents and brass fixtures that gave it this vintage luxury vibe. My cabin was on deck 8, with a small balcony overlooking the ocean. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. The first day was perfect. I spent it by the pool with a fruity drink, took some photos of the sunset, and had an amazing seafood dinner. I even chatted with some friendly couples and a group of women on a girls' trip. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Mark or the mess my life had become. Then came the second night. I had fallen asleep around 11 after having a couple glasses of wine at the ship's jazz lounge. I woke up suddenly around 2 in the morning to this weird tapping sound. At first, I thought someone was at my door, but then I realized it was coming from the wall next to my bed. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Then it would pause and start again. I figured it was just the people in the next cabin being inconsiderate. I knocked back on the wall, hoping they'd get the hint. The tapping stopped immediately. Relief washed over me, and I rolled over to go back to sleep. That's when I heard it. A whisper, barely audible, coming through the wall. "Help me. Please help me." It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I sat up, heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. Just the ambient hum of the ship's engines. I told myself it was just a dream, or my imagination running wild after all the stress I'd been under. The next morning, I checked the ship's layout map by the elevators. According to the map, there shouldn't have been a cabin next to mine, just a maintenance corridor. I asked a passing crew member about it, and he smiled politely and said there were some areas of the ship that weren't accessible to passengers. Something about the way he said it felt off, like he was reciting a line. At breakfast, I overheard a couple at the next table talking in hushed voices. The woman was saying something about hearing crying in their bathroom in the middle of the night, even though they had an exterior cabin with no shared walls. Her husband was trying to rationalize it, old pipes, the ship settling, whatever, but she wasn't buying it. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A passenger had apparently gone missing during dinner last night. A man in his 50s who'd been traveling alone. The staff was being very hush-hush about it, but the rumor was that he'd vanished between the main dining room and his cabin. I tried to enjoy my day, I really did. I went to a cooking demonstration, lounged by the pool, took some photos of the incredibly blue water. But I couldn't shake this growing sense of unease. The ship's staff seemed more on edge than the day before, constantly whispering to each other when they thought passengers weren't looking. That night, I had dinner with some people I'd met, a retired couple from Florida and a single woman about my age named Rachel. During dessert, Rachel mentioned that the ship was entering the Bermuda Triangle. She said it like it was a joke, but nobody laughed. The retired woman, Joanne, mentioned that her watch had stopped working that afternoon, and her husband's phone was acting strange too, the battery draining for no reason. I returned to my cabin around 10, exhausted but also dreading going to sleep. I took a long shower, hoping the hot water would relax me. When I got out, I noticed the bathroom mirror was completely fogged up and someone had drawn a simple stick figure in the condensation. I froze, staring at it. I hadn't touched the mirror. I quickly wiped it away with a towel, my hands shaking. The tapping started again that night, same as before. Tap, tap, tap. This time I didn't respond. I just lay there, staring at the wall, my whole body tense. Then came the whisper again, a little louder this time. They won't let me leave. Help me. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights. I was not going to sleep in that room again. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk, but there was no signal. Not even the ship's Wi-Fi was working. I threw on some clothes and decided to go to the guest services desk in person. The hallways were eerily quiet. The ship's normal, gentle rocking felt more pronounced, and the lights seemed dimmer than usual. I passed a couple hurrying in the opposite direction, the woman crying softly, while her partner led her along with his arm around her shoulders. At the guest services desk, there was a line of about 8 people, all looking agitated. When my turn came, I told the staff member about the tapping and the whispers. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted nervously to her colleague before she assured me that the ship was making some unusual noises due to weather conditions. She offered to move me to another cabin, which I accepted immediately. My new cabin was on deck 6, on the opposite side of the ship. It didn't have a balcony, but I didn't care. I just wanted a normal night's sleep. The staff member escorted me there herself, which seemed odd at 3 in the morning, but I was too tired to question it. The 4th day of the cruise is when things really started falling apart. The weather changed. Dramatically, dark clouds rolled in and the sea got rough. The captain announced that some outdoor activities would be canceled and passengers should take care when moving around the ship. But it wasn't just the weather. People were talking openly now about strange experiences. A teenage girl swore she saw a man in old-fashioned clothing, like an officer's uniform from the early 1900s, standing on the deck during a storm, completely dry despite the pouring rain. An elderly man reported hearing a child crying in the stairwell, but when he went to investigate, there was no one there. 3 separate passengers claimed they saw someone walk through a solid wall in the ballroom. The ship's power started flickering that afternoon. Just brief interruptions, but enough to cause concern. The crew kept insisting it was related to the weather, but I noticed they were traveling in pairs now, never alone. The friendly atmosphere from the first day was gone, replaced with fearful whispers and nervous glances. That night at dinner, nearly half the tables in the dining room were empty. The cruise director made an announcement about a special midnight buffet to lift spirits, but her voice cracked while she was speaking. I skipped the buffet and went back to my new cabin, but I couldn't sleep. The whole ship creaked and groaned as it pushed through the rough seas. Around midnight, the power went out completely. The emergency lights came on after a few seconds, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. I could hear doors opening and closing in the hallway, people's confused voices. Then the ship's intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice instructed everyone to remain in their cabins while they resolved a minor electrical issue. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, jumping at every noise. My new cabin didn't have the tapping, but somehow the silence was worse. I kept thinking about what the voice had said. They won't let me leave. Who were they? The crew? Something else? By the fifth night, I'd had enough. I needed answers. The ship had been on lockdown most of the day, with crew members posted in the hallways for our safety. But they couldn't watch everywhere. Around 2 in the morning, when the ship was at its quietest, I slipped out of my cabin with my phone and a small flashlight. The hallways were deserted. The emergency lighting was still on, giving everything a blood-red tint. I made my way back to Deck 8, to my original cabin. I don't know what I expected to find, but I needed to know what was on the other side of that wall. The passageway was eerily silent. As I approached my old cabin, I noticed something odd, a door at the end of the hallway that I hadn't seen before. It was partially hidden behind a service cart, but it was definitely there. According to the ship's layout, that door shouldn't have existed. I hesitated for a moment, then walked toward it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Just as I reached for the handle, the temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing about 10 feet away near my old cabin door. But she wasn't normal. Her face was gaunt, her eyes wide and terrified. Her dress was soaked, dripping seawater onto the carpet, but the water vanished before it hit the floor. She looked right at me and whispered, "You shouldn't be here. None of us should be here." I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to scream. The apparition started moving toward me, her feet not quite touching the ground. Just as she reached out her hand, which looked partially transparent in the red emergency lighting, someone grabbed my arm from behind. I nearly screamed before realizing it was a crew member, a man I hadn't seen before. His grip was painfully tight as he pulled me away. "You need to return to your cabin immediately, miss," he said urgently, not even acknowledging what we'd both just seen. "It's not safe to wander the ship at night." "Did you see her?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "The woman in the wet dress? What is going on this ship?" His expression changed subtly. "There was no woman, miss. You're overtired. The storm has everyone on edge." But his eyes kept darting back to the spot where I'd seen her, and I noticed his hand was trembling slightly as he escorted me back to Deck 6. The next morning, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that due to mechanical issues, the SS Obsidian would be returning to New Orleans immediately, cutting our cruise short by 2 days. No one complained. That final day was the longest of my life. No one was even pretending things were normal anymore. Crew members moved through the ship in groups, speaking in hushed tones. Passengers stayed in their cabins or huddled together in the main lounges. The ship's photographers, who had been everywhere taking pictures the first few days, were nowhere to be seen. Despite everything, I found myself drawn to the deck that afternoon. I stood at the railing, watching the churning ocean below. The sky was gray and threatening, matching my mood. That's when an older crew member approached me, the first time I'd seen any of them alone in days. "Been working cruise ships for 30 years, he said quietly, not looking at me but out at the water. "Never seen anything like this voyage." "What is it?" I asked. What's happening on this ship? He was silent for a long moment. Some things are better left alone. Some waters shouldn't be crossed. He glanced around nervously, then added, "This ship, it wasn't built from scratch. They incorporated parts from older vessels, salvaged materials. Some say certain things can attach themselves to objects. Follow them." Before he could say more, another crew member called him away. He left quickly, refusing to meet my eyes again. As we sailed back toward New Orleans, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Whenever I looked over the railing into the dark water, I thought I could see shapes moving beneath the surface, keeping pace with the ship. And sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, I could make out that faint, desperate whisper, "They won't let us leave." We docked in New Orleans the next morning. I've never been so happy to set foot on solid ground. But even now, months later, I still hear that tapping in my dreams. Tap, tap, tap. And sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can smell seawater, even though I'm miles from the ocean. I don't know what was on that ship with us. I don't know if it stayed on the Obsidian or if some of it followed us home. All I know is that I'll never set foot on another cruise ship as long as I live. Some things are better left at sea. Story 6. I never wanted to work the night shift at Blackwater Memorial Hospital. The pay was decent enough, and I needed the money to cover rent after my roommate moved out unexpectedly. But something about that place felt off from the moment I stepped through those doors for my interview. This happened about 7 months ago, but I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I've never shared this with anyone besides my therapist, who suggested writing it out might help. So here goes. I'm not some paranormal enthusiast or someone who jumps at shadows. Before this, I was the guy who laughed during horror movies and rolled my eyes at ghost stories. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night, and I don't think I ever will. The hospital itself is this massive brick building from the 1950s that sits on the edge of town, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and a small wooded area. It's had several additions built onto it over the decades, creating this maze-like structure with wings that don't quite match. The east wing was the oldest part, and they were renovating it when I started, gutting the whole thing down to the studs. My job was simple: monitor the security cameras, do hourly patrols, check that all doors were secure, and report anything unusual. The first few weeks were mind-numbingly boring. I'd spend my 10-hour shifts from 10 at night to 8 in the morning watching empty hallways on grainy monitors while sipping lukewarm coffee from the break room. It was during my 4th week when things started getting weird. I'd be watching the monitors and catch glimpses of movement in empty corridors. The lights in the basement would flicker for no reason. Doors I swore I'd closed would be opened during my next patrol. Little things, you know? Things that could be explained away by drafts or electrical issues in an old building. The night manager, Sandra, told me the hospital was notorious for its electrical problems. "Budget cuts," she'd said with a shrug when I mentioned the flickering lights. "We've been asking maintenance to fix that for months." But it wasn't just the lights or the doors. It was the feeling that crawled up my spine whenever I walked past the East Wing entrance. Like someone was watching me. I'd turn around, expecting to see a nurse or doctor, but there was never anyone there. The cameras never showed anything either. I started dreading my patrols. The hospital feels different at night. During the day, it's full of people, doctors rushing around, visitors coming and going, phones ringing. At night, it's just the skeleton crew, a few nurses on each floor, the occasional doctor on call, and me. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the hum of vending machines and the occasional squeak of a nurse's shoes on the linoleum. May 7th was when everything went to hell. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at 10, relieved the day guard, and settled in for my usual 10 hours of mind-numbing boredom. Sandra was off that night, and the charge nurse, Diane, was handling any administrative issues. Around midnight, I was doing my usual scan of the monitors when I saw something that made my blood run cold. On camera 4, the one that covered the main corridor of the East Wing, there was a figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the hallway. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The East Wing was supposed to be completely empty, sealed off for renovations. The construction crew only worked during the day, and they always locked up before leaving. No one should have been in there. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and tried to contact whoever it was. "This is security. East Wing is off limits due to construction. Please identify yourself." No response, just static. I tried again. "Hello? Anyone in the East Wing? That area is restricted." Nothing. I should have called for backup. That's what protocol said to do. But I'd already gotten shit from the other guards for being jumpy after mentioning the flickering lights and strange noises. I didn't want to call the police over what could be a contractor who forgot something or a lost patient. So I decided to check it out myself. Big mistake. I grabbed my flashlight and keycard and headed toward the East Wing. The hospital seemed eerily quiet that night. Usually, I'd at least hear the distant sounds of the ICU monitors or the nurses chatting at their station. But that night, it was like the whole building was holding its breath. The door to the East Wing was heavy, one of those fire doors with the push bar. It had a temporary keypad lock installed for the construction. I punched in the code and pushed it open, wincing at the loud creak that echoed down the hall. The East Wing was different from the rest of the hospital. The renovation had stripped it down to bare walls in some places. Plastic sheeting hung from the ceiling, and the floor was covered in a fine layer of dust and debris. The air smelled of plaster and something else, something musty and old. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I moved down the hallway, following the path to where I'd seen the figure on the camera. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the empty space. "Security, is anyone here?" I reached the spot where the person had been standing. There was nothing there, just more dust and debris. But I noticed something odd. A single set of footprints in the dust, leading further down the hallway. They weren't mine. I was coming from the opposite direction. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding in my chest. They led to a junction where the hallway split into two. The footprints continued down the left corridor. As I turned to follow them, I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Light, quick steps, like someone trying not to be heard. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. "Who's there?" Nothing. The hallway behind me was empty. I stood frozen for a moment, straining to hear. There it was again, footsteps, but now they were ahead of me, down the corridor where the footprints led. "This isn't funny," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This area is restricted. You need to leave now." I continued down the hallway, following both the footprints and the sound of steps that always seemed to be just around the next corner. The renovation became less evident as I went deeper into the wing. It was like stepping back in time. Old tile floors, peeling wallpaper, medical equipment from decades ago pushed against walls. The footprints led to a door, room 317. It was slightly ajar, a thin strip of darkness visible in the gap. According to the renovation plans I'd seen, This entire section should have been gutted already. I hesitated outside the door. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go back to the security desk and call for backup. But I was already there, and if someone was trespassing, it was my job to deal with it. I pushed the door open with my foot, keeping my flashlight trained on the opening. The room was small, a standard hospital room with a bed, a chair, and a small bathroom. But unlike the hallway, which was in various stages of demolition, this room looked untouched. The bed was made with crisp white sheets. There was a vase of flowers on the side table, fresh flowers, their scent cutting through the musty air. And in the corner, crouched down with their back to me, was a figure. It looked like a person wearing a hospital gown, hunched over as if examining something on the floor. Their hair was long and matted, hanging down in greasy strands. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This area is closed for renovation. You need to come with me." The figure didn't respond, didn't move. I stepped into the room, my flashlight trained on them. "Hello? Can you hear me?" That's when it stood up. I can't properly describe how it moved. It wasn't natural. Its joints seemed to bend in ways human joints shouldn't be able to. It rose in sections, first the legs straightening with a series of small pops, then the torso unfolding, and finally the head lifting last. All while its back remained to me. I stood frozen in the doorway, my flashlight beam trembling as my hand shook. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. The figure's head turned, just the head, not the shoulders. It rotated almost 180 degrees, like an owl. I caught a glimpse of its face, gaunt, with sunken eyes and gray skin stretched tight over bone, before it moved. Not toward me, but toward the wall. And then, I swear on everything I believe in, it went through the wall. Not like a ghost in a movie, just passing through solid matter. More like the wall swallowed it, the plaster rippling like water before settling back into solid form. I stood there, stunned, for maybe 2 seconds before the door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the frame. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging me into total darkness. The air in the room turned freezing cold instantly. I could see my breath clouding in front of me when I exhaled, visible in the faint light coming from under the door. That's when I heard it, breathing. Not my own panicked gasps, but something else. Something slow and deliberate, right behind me. "You shouldn't have come," a voice whispered, so close to my ear that I felt the cold breath on my neck. I lost it. I lunged for the door, fumbling for the handle in the dark. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck, like fingers made of ice. The breathing got louder, more ragged. I threw my entire body against the door in panic, expecting resistance, but it flew open so suddenly that I fell into the hallway, sprawling on the dusty floor. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to grab my flashlight. I ran. I ran through the corridors of the East Wing, no longer caring about the noise I was making. I burst through the fire door back into the main hospital, sprinted past the security desk, past a startled nurse who called after me, and straight out the main entrance into the parking lot. I stood there under the yellow glow of the streetlights, gasping for breath, my uniform soaked with sweat. My car was right there. I could have gotten in and driven away, never looked back. But I had to know. I turned around and looked up at the hospital. My eyes were drawn to the East Wing, to the row of darkened windows on the 3rd floor. Room 317 would be the 5th window from the left. There was a light on in that window, a faint, flickering light, like a candle, and a figure standing there watching me. I quit the next day, told them I had a family emergency and couldn't work there anymore. I didn't even go back for my last paycheck. I've tried researching the history of Blackwater Memorial since then, found out that the East Wing used to be the psychiatric ward back in the 70s and 80s before they built the new behavioral health center across town. There were rumors of mistreatment, of experimental therapies, gone wrong but nothing concrete. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. I drive the long way around town now just to avoid passing the hospital. I've been offered other security jobs since then, but I can't bring myself to work another night shift anywhere. Sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I still hear that whisper, "You shouldn't have come." And I feel those cold fingers on the back of my neck. Story 7. I don't usually talk about this. I've tried to forget it for years now, but it's getting harder to ignore what's happening again. I need to tell someone who might understand, even if you'll probably think I'm crazy or making it up. I was 11 when my grandmother passed away, leaving her old Victorian house in Riverton to my mom and me. We'd been living in a cramped apartment after my dad left, so despite the creepy vibes of the place, it was a step up for us. The house was massive compared to what we were used to. 3 stories with those weird turret rooms, creaky floorboards, and wallpaper that was peeling in places. It smelled like old books and lavender, which I later realized was my grandmother's perfume that had somehow seeped into everything. The day we moved in, Mom took me on a tour. Most of the rooms were filled with furniture draped in white sheets, making them look like ghosts frozen in time. The kitchen had this ancient stove that took forever to heat up, and the bathroom fixtures were these brass monstrosities that made weird gurgling sounds at night. But none of that compared to the basement. The basement stairs were steep and narrow, and the light switch was at the bottom, which meant you had to walk down in darkness before you could see anything. I hated it from the moment I set foot on the first step. The air down there was different, heavier somehow, and much colder than the rest of the house. Mom flipped on the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling, and that's when I saw it. Against the far wall stood this massive antique mirror, easily 7 feet tall with an ornate wooden frame. The wood was dark, almost black, and covered in these strange symbols that didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. They reminded me of the weird symbols you see in horror movies about witchcraft or something. The glass itself wasn't clear like a normal mirror. It had this cloudy, smoky quality to it, as if you were looking through dirty water. Mom grabbed my arm when I took a step toward it. "Cassie, listen to me," she said, her voice dead serious. "Never ever touch that mirror. Don't even go near it if you can help it." I asked her why, obviously. Any kid would. "It was your grandmother's, and she made me promise to leave it exactly where it is. That's all you need to know." That was it. No explanation, no reason. Just a stern warning that left me with a million questions. Of course, telling a kid not to do something without explaining why is basically guaranteeing they'll be obsessed with doing exactly that thing. Still, something about the way Mom looked at that mirror, like she was afraid of it, kept me from disobeying. At least for a while. For the next 2 years, I mostly avoided the basement. Sometimes I had to go down to get something from storage, but I'd always keep my back to that wall, feeling like the mirror was watching me. A couple times, I swear I caught movement in it from the corner of my eye, but when I'd force myself to look directly at it, all I'd see was my own reflection, slightly distorted by the cloudy glass. Except sometimes, my reflection didn't move quite right. Like there'd be this tiny delay, just a fraction of a second, between me moving my hand and seeing the movement in the mirror. Or I'd turn to leave and catch my reflection still facing forward for a split second before it caught up. I never told Mom about this. I figured she'd either think I was making it up for attention, or worse, she'd believe me and be scared. Everything changed when I turned 13. Mom had to work a night shift at the hospital, she's a nurse, and our usual babysitter canceled last minute. Mom decided I was old enough to stay home alone for a few hours. She left dinner in the fridge, made me promise to lock all the doors and windows, and told me she'd be home by midnight. The house felt different when I was alone. Bigger, emptier, with shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I tried watching TV, but nothing good was on. I tried reading, but couldn't focus. By 9 o'clock, I was bored out of my mind, and that's when the thought hit me. I finally had a chance to examine the mirror without Mom knowing. Looking back, I don't know what possessed me to go down there that night. Maybe it was just teenage rebellion or curiosity. Maybe it was something else drawing me down. All I know is that one minute I was sitting on the couch flipping channels, and the next I was standing at the top of the basement stairs, flashlight in hand. My heart was pounding as I made my way down those creaky steps. I didn't turn on the main light because I was worried the neighbors might notice and tell Mom I'd been in the basement. Instead, I just used my flashlight, sweeping its beam across the concrete floor until it landed on the mirror. In the narrow beam of light, the carvings on the frame seemed to shift and move, like they were alive somehow. I stepped closer, fascinated despite the dread building in my stomach. For the first time, I studied those symbols carefully. Swirls that connected to sharp angles, circles with lines through them, patterns that seemed to repeat but not quite. They made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long, like they were constantly changing shape. Then I pointed the flashlight at the glass itself and saw my reflection. Except it wasn't quite right. My reflection looked excited. I was terrified, but the me in the mirror had this eager look in her eyes. When I frowned, my reflection took a fraction too long to mimic me. I took a step back, and that's when I noticed it. In the background of the mirror, behind my reflection, was a tall, thin figure standing in the shadows. It was hard to make out details, just a dark silhouette, unnaturally tall and thin, like someone had stretched a person out. I whipped around, shining my flashlight into the dark corners of the basement, but there was nothing there. I was alone. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer to my reflection. Not next to it, but closer than before, as if it had taken a few steps forward while I wasn't looking. My hands started shaking so bad that the flashlight beam bounced wildly across the mirror's surface. I wanted to run, to get the hell out of there, but I was frozen in place. Then my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. My mouth was open in horror, but in the mirror, I was smiling this wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across my face. And then, while I stood there paralyzed with fear, my reflection tilted its head to the side at an impossible angle, like its neck had broken. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor and rolled, casting crazy shadows across the walls. I scrambled to pick it up, and when I pointed it back at the mirror, my reflection had moved closer to the glass. It was right up against it now, with both hands pressed flat against the inside of the mirror, like it was testing the surface. The figure behind my reflection was right behind it now, its long, thin hands resting on my reflection's shoulders. I still couldn't see its face clearly, just dark hollows where eyes should be. Then my reflection's fingers began to push through the glass. I'm not exaggerating or making this up. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, and my reflection's fingertips started to poke through to my side. The glass bulged outward as if something was pressing against a membrane. First just the tips, then the first knuckle of each finger. The sound it made was what finally broke my paralysis. This wet, sucking noise like someone pulling their foot from deep mud. I screamed and ran, taking the basement stairs 2 at a time, slamming the door behind me and pushing a bookshelf in front of it. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom with all the lights on, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hands. I kept thinking I heard footsteps on the stairs or saw shadows moving under my door. When Mom finally came home around 12:30, I was sobbing so hard I could barely speak. I told her everything. I expected her to be angry that I'd disobeyed her, or to tell me it was just my imagination. Instead, she turned so pale I thought she might faint. "It happened to your grandmother too," she finally said, sitting heavily on the edge of my bed. "When she was young. That's why she warned me about it, and why I warned you." According to Mom, my grandmother had a similar experience as a teenager. She'd been fascinated by the mirror, which had been in her family for generations. One night, she saw her reflection try to come through, along with something else, something that had been trapped on the other side for a very long time. "The mirror wants to be seen," Mom explained. "But when you see it, it sees you too. And once it sees you, it doesn't forget." We moved out the next week. Mom put the house up for sale, and we left the mirror exactly where it was, sealed the basement door, and never went back. She made the real estate agent promise to tell any potential buyers that the basement was structurally unsound and should never be entered. That was 4 years ago. I'm 17 now, living in a different city, going to a normal high school, trying to be a normal teenager. But sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window or a mirror, I see it smile when I'm not smiling. Sometimes I see movement behind me that isn't there when I turn around. And lately, I've been noticing that my reflection is getting slower to mimic my movements again, like something is gradually working its way back to me. I sleep with a blanket over my mirror now. I avoid reflective surfaces when I can, but I know it's only a matter of time. Whatever was in that mirror, whatever wore my face, it found me once, and I think it's getting closer to finding me again. Story 8. I've been driving 18-wheelers for almost 20 years now. Denver to San Francisco, Chicago to Seattle, Miami to New York. You name a route, I've probably driven it. Nothing phases me anymore. Bad weather, aggressive drivers, long nights. It's all part of the job. At least that's what I thought until last month. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night on Interstate 80. Part of me wants to forget it, but I can't. I need to write it down. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. It was the first week of November, one of those nights where winter decides to show up early. I was hauling electronics from Denver to San Francisco, a route I've done hundreds of times. The dispatcher had me on a tight schedule, so I planned to drive through the night. The temperature had dropped to about 15 degrees, unusual for that time of year, but the roads were clear, just cold, bone-chilling cold. Around 1 in the morning, I hit a stretch of I-80 in western Nebraska. I remember checking my GPS and seeing nothing but highway for the next 60 miles. No exits, no rest stops, nothing. Usually there'd be at least a few other trucks or cars, even at that hour. But that night, nothing. Empty in both directions. It was like the highway had been cleared just for me. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories. I normally don't go for that stuff, but it kept me company. The moon was nearly full, casting this pale blue light across the landscape. Everything looked frozen, like a photograph. About 30 minutes into this empty stretch, I noticed something on the horizon. At first, I thought it might be construction. maybe lane closures or roadwork. As I got closer, I realized it was a line of trucks, 5 of them, running in perfect formation, taking up the right lane. Nothing unusual about trucks traveling together, but something felt off. They were moving way too slow, maybe 40 miles per hour in a 75 zone, and they were perfectly spaced, exactly the same distance apart. I mean exactly, like they were connected by invisible rods. I slowed down a bit as I approached. My headlights caught the back of the last truck, and that's when I noticed there was no company logo, no markings at all, just rust. Not your normal road grime, but deep, thick rust that covered most of the trailer. The taillights were dim, barely visible. I got on the CB radio. "Eastbound trucker approaching your convoy. You folks okay? You're running mighty slow." Nothing, not even static. I tried again. "Hey, convoy on I-80 westbound. You've got a driver coming up on your left. Everything all right up there?" Still nothing. By this point, I was about 50 yards behind them. That's when I noticed they weren't just driving in formation. They were moving in perfect synchronization. When one slightly adjusted its position, they all did, at exactly the same moment, like they weren't even being driven by humans. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something was seriously wrong here. I decided to pass them. I moved into the left lane and accelerated. As I passed each truck, I looked over, trying to see into the cabs. The windows were dirty, clouded with frost or dust, but I could see enough. They were empty, every single one. No drivers, no passengers, nothing. But the trucks kept moving, perfectly straight, perfectly spaced. The 4th truck in line was a tanker, ancient-looking thing, no hazmat placards, just corroded metal and chipped paint. As I passed it, I swear to God the truck turned slightly toward me, like it was watching me go by. The lead truck was the worst. It was an old Peterbilt, probably from the 70s, with peeling paint and tires so bald I could see the metal cords exposed. But what really got me was the license plate. A faded government-style plate, the kind they used to issue in the 70s. I couldn't make out the numbers, just that it was old. Way too old for any truck still on the road. I gunned it. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. I pushed my rig up to 85, faster than I should have been going, just to put distance between me and whatever the hell that convoy was. After about a mile, I glanced in my mirror, expecting to see their headlights far behind me. They were gone. All 5 trucks had vanished. I nearly swerved off the road. I checked both mirrors, slowed down, looked carefully behind me. Nothing. The highway was completely empty again. I grabbed my thermos, took a swig of coffee, and tried to convince myself I'd been hallucinating from fatigue. But the coffee was fresh. I wasn't tired. I know what I saw. For the next 100 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, sure they would appear again. Nothing, just empty highway stretching back into darkness. I pushed on through the night, trying to make sense of it. By dawn, I was in Wyoming, pulling into a truck stop outside Rawlins. I needed fuel, food, and honestly, I needed to tell someone what happened. The diner inside was nearly empty, just a couple of local guys at the counter and an older waitress with dyed red hair and turquoise jewelry. Her name tag said Dottie. She came over with a coffee pot as I slid into a booth. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, filling my cup without waiting for an answer. I must have looked as shaken as I felt. "Yeah, you could say that." "Road's been bad with the cold front? You come from the east?" I nodded, warming my hands around the mug. "Denver, headed to San Francisco." She studied my face. Something happened. I can always tell. I hesitated. In 20 years of driving, I'd never been the guy who tells ghost stories at truck stops. but I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I saw something weird on I-80 last night in Nebraska, a convoy of trucks with no drivers. I expected her to laugh. She didn't. She set down the coffee pot and slid into the seat across from me. 5 trucks? She asked quietly. The hair on my arms stood up. Yeah, 5. How did you know? Lead truck an old Peterbilt? Rusty as hell? I felt cold all over again. You've seen them. She shook her head. Not me. But you're not the first to come through here talking about them. We call them the silent convoy. What are they? I asked, leaning forward. Some say they're the ghosts of truckers who never made it to their destinations. There was a big pileup back in '76 during a blizzard. 5 trucks involved. Everyone died. Jesus, I whispered. Others think it's something darker. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. There's stories about a government convoy that disappeared in the '70s, carrying something they shouldn't have been, something dangerous. But what did I see? Actual ghosts? She shrugged. All I know is what other drivers have told me. Some see them once and never again. Others, she trailed off. Others what? Others report seeing them in their mirrors for hundreds of miles afterward, following, never catching up, never falling behind, just following. I felt sick. What happens to those drivers? Most of them stop coming through eventually, new routes, I guess, or they quit driving altogether. And the rest? She met my eyes. There's at least 3 I know of who disappeared. Trucks found abandoned on the side of the road. Drivers never seen again. I pushed my coffee away, appetite gone. Why didn't I know about this? Why isn't this some famous trucking legend? People talk. Company men tell them to shut up. Insurance doesn't cover ghost trucks, so it stays quiet. She stood up, grabbing the coffee pot. Look, take my advice. If you see them again, don't follow them. Don't try to pass them. Why not? Because once they've set their sights on you, they don't stop until they've taken what they're after. She walked away, leaving me with those words hanging in the air. I sat there for a long time, watching the sunlight stretch across the parking lot, making the frost on the trucks glitter. Normal trucks, with company logos and license plates from this decade, with drivers having breakfast inside. I finished my route to San Francisco, made it on time, acted normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, about what Dottie had told me. It's been 3 weeks now. I've taken other routes, avoided I-80 when possible, but tomorrow I'm heading back to Denver. Same route. I keep telling myself it was just my imagination, just my mind playing tricks after too many hours on empty roads. But last night, I was checking my logbook, and I realized something I hadn't noticed before. Since that night, every time I'm on the road after midnight, my CB radio picks up static. Not normal static, a pattern, like Morse code or something. Always the same sequence over and over. I recorded it on my phone, played it slower. It sounds like engines. 5 distinct engine sounds, running in perfect synchronization. I'm about to head out soon. I've checked my truck 3 times. Everything's normal. The highway behind me is empty for now, but I know they're out there. The silent convoy, maybe waiting for me, maybe not. All I know is, if you're driving I-80 at night and you see 5 rusty trucks moving too slow and too perfect, don't pass them. Don't even look at them. Just turn around and find another way. Story 9. I still can't make sense of what happened to me 3 nights ago. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now, and I've seen some weird shit on the road. Wild animals darting across highways, crazy drivers, even a few unexplainable lights in the sky once. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me on Route 66 last Thursday night. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap. Never have been. My ex-wife used to watch those ghost hunting shows, and I'd always laugh at how ridiculous they were. Guess the joke's on me now. It was around 11:30 at night, and I was hauling a shipment of electronics from Chicago to Albuquerque. I've done this route dozens of times before. The familiar stretch of old Route 66 through the Midwest is practically etched into my brain at this point. You get into a rhythm after so many years, the hum of the engine, the occasional flicker of headlights from oncoming traffic, the vast emptiness of the landscape at night. I'd been driving since about 2 in the afternoon, and fatigue was starting to set in. I know better than to push myself too hard, but I wanted to make it to the next truck stop about 40 miles ahead. The radio was playing some old country song I couldn't name, and I had the window cracked just enough to let in some cool October air to keep me alert. The moon was full that night, casting an eerie silver glow across the empty fields on either side of the highway. I remember checking my side mirrors and noticing how the moonlight reflected off them, creating these weird patterns on the dashboard. That's when I first saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There she was, standing on the shoulder of the road in the middle of nowhere, a young woman with long, dark hair blowing in the wind. She was wearing what looked like a white dress, which seemed insane given how cold it was that night. I almost didn't stop. Every trucker knows the dangers of picking up hitchhikers, especially on isolated stretches of road at night. But something about her made me hit the brakes. She looked desperate, scared. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her and watched in my mirror as she ran toward the truck. The way she moved was odd, almost like she was floating rather than running. I chalked it up to the weird lighting and my tired eyes. When I leaned over to open the passenger door, I got my first real look at her face. She was young, maybe early 20s, with pale skin and these intense dark eyes that seemed to hold something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. "You okay, miss?" I asked as she climbed into the cab. "It's pretty late to be out here alone." She didn't answer right away, just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Then she turned to me and whispered, "Thank you for stopping." Her voice was so soft I could barely hear it over the idle of the engine. I put the truck back in gear and pulled onto the highway. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Home," she said simply. "I need to get home before they find me." I wanted to ask who they were, but something told me not to press. The cab fell silent except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional static from the radio. That's when I noticed the temperature dropping. I mean, plummeting. My breath started fogging in front of my face, and I could see goosebumps forming on my arms. I reached for the heater controls, cranking them up to full blast. "Sorry about that," I said. "Heater in this old girl acts up sometimes." She didn't respond, just kept staring ahead, her hands now trembling slightly in her lap. Then came the smell. It hit me like a wall, this sickly sweet odor of rotting flowers, like someone had left a bouquet in water for way too long. I cracked my window a bit more, thinking maybe it was coming from outside, but that only made it stronger. We drove in silence for about 15 minutes. The whole time, I kept glancing over at her, trying to figure out what her story was. Runaway, domestic trouble, drugs, nothing seemed to fit. She was too composed, despite her obvious fear. Suddenly, she sat up straight, her eyes fixed on something ahead. "Turn here," she said, her voice urgent but still barely above a whisper. I looked where she was pointing. There was a dirt road I'd never noticed before, despite having driven this route countless times. It wasn't on my GPS either. "I don't think that road leads anywhere, miss," I said, slowing down but not turning. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I need to get home. They'll find me if I don't." Against every instinct telling me this was a bad idea, I turned down the dirt road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow path flanked by overgrown fields and the occasional dead tree. The truck bounced and jolted over the uneven ground, but I kept going. For her. After about half a mile, a structure loomed in the distance. As we got closer, I could see it was an old farmhouse, 2 stories, with a wraparound porch and boarded-up windows. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. "That's it," she whispered. "That's home." I pulled up to the front of the house and put the truck in park, leaving the engine running. Every warning bell in my head was going off now. This place was abandoned, possibly dangerous. There was no way this was where she lived. "Listen," I started to say, turning toward her, but the words died in my throat. She was staring at the house with an expression I can only describe as pure longing. Tears were streaming down her face, catching the moonlight like tiny diamonds. "Thank you," she said, turning to me with a small smile. "I can find my way from here." Before I could respond, she opened the door and stepped out. I watched as she walked toward the house, her white dress billowing behind her in the night breeze. Something about the way she moved still seemed off, too fluid, too graceful for someone walking on a dirt path in the dark. I should have just driven away, should have put that truck in gear and never looked back. But curiosity got the better of me. I reached for my flashlight in the glove compartment and stepped out of the cab. "Miss?" I called out, but she was already at the front door. I watched as she reached for the handle, then simply disappeared. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone, like someone had switched off a light. I stood there, frozen, the flashlight clutched in my trembling hand. This couldn't be happening. People don't just vanish. I forced myself to approach the house, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The front door was padlocked shut. Rust had fused the mechanism so thoroughly it would have taken tools to open it. There was no way she could have gone inside. I swept my flashlight across the front of the house, and that's when I saw it. A small wooden marker to the right of the porch, almost hidden by overgrown weeds. I moved closer, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The marker was weather-worn, but I could still make out the faded letters. Eleanor Grayson, gone but not forgotten, 1920 to 1940. 1940? 83 years ago. I dropped my flashlight and ran back to my truck, fumbling with the door handle before practically throwing myself into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, even though the engine was still running. I reversed out of there so fast I nearly got stuck in a ditch. Once I hit the main road, I floored it, not caring about speed limits or safety. All I wanted was distance between me and that house. About 20 miles down the road, I pulled into a truck stop, my heart still racing. I needed coffee, a bathroom break, and most importantly, to be around other living, breathing humans. The diner was nearly empty, except for a couple of other truckers and a middle-aged waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile. I took a seat at the counter and ordered the strongest coffee they had. "Rough night?" the waitress asked as she poured my cup. I must have looked as shaken as I felt. "You could say that," I replied, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth. I was still freezing despite the diner being comfortably heated. She studied my face for a moment, then lowered her voice. You saw her, didn't you? The girl in white on Route 66. My blood ran cold. What did you just say? The waitress glanced around, then leaned in closer. Eleanor Grayson, pretty young thing with dark hair, died in a car crash back in 1940. Her boyfriend was driving drunk, ran off the road about a mile from her family's farmhouse. She survived the initial crash but died trying to walk home. I couldn't speak, couldn't even think straight. A lot of truckers have seen her over the years, she continued, refilling my coffee without me asking. Always on foggy or moonlit nights, always asking to be taken home. How do you know all this? I finally managed to ask. She shrugged. My grandfather was one of the first to pick her up back in the 50s. It's kind of a local legend now. Not everyone believes it, of course. I sure as hell believed it now. After 3 cups of coffee and a plate of eggs I barely touched, I headed back to my truck. I needed to get moving, to put this whole experience behind me. But as I climbed into the cab, something caught my eye on the passenger seat. A single white flower. Not a rose or a daisy or anything I could name. Just a small, delicate white flower that definitely hadn't been there before. My hands trembling, I picked it up. It was real. Soft petals, a subtle, sweet scent, nothing like the rotting smell from earlier. I almost threw it out the window, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed it carefully on my dashboard. I drove the rest of my route in a daze, jumping at shadows and checking my rearview mirror more times than I could count. When I finally delivered my shipment in Albuquerque, I took a week of personal leave. I told my dispatcher I was coming down with something, but the truth is, I couldn't face getting back on the road. It's been 3 days now, and I still can't shake the feeling that something fundamentally changed for me that night. I've tried researching Eleanor Grayson online, but there's not much to find. Just a few forum posts from other truckers who claim to have seen her, and an old newspaper clipping about a fatal car accident in 1940. The flower is still on my dashboard, and here's the strangest part, it hasn't wilted, not even a little. I know I'll have to get back on the road eventually. This job is all I have, but I don't think I'll be taking Route 66 at night anymore. And if I ever see a young woman in a white dress standing on the shoulder, I'll just keep driving. Because some passengers are just looking for a ride, but others are looking for something none of us can give them. Story 10. I still can't sleep right after what happened 3 months ago. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, seen all kinds of weird shit on the road, but nothing like this. I'm writing this down because I need someone to believe me. My wife thinks I need therapy. My dispatcher thinks I'm on something, but I know what I saw. It was the second week of October, one of those clear, cold Texas nights where you can see every star. I was hauling electronics from Los Angeles to Dallas, something I'd done maybe 100 times before. Interstate 10 through West Texas is usually peaceful. Just you, your thoughts, and miles of empty road. That night started normal enough. I'd been driving since early morning, and around 11 p.m., that familiar heaviness started settling behind my eyes. You know the feeling, when the white lines start to blur and your head gets foggy. I knew better than to push it. I've seen what happens to guys who think they can fight sleep. They end up wrapped around a guardrail or worse. There was a rest area coming up near Van Horn, so I decided to pull in and catch a few hours of sleep. When I pulled off the highway, I immediately noticed how empty the place was. Usually these rest stops have at least 5 or 6 trucks, but that night there was just one other rig parked at the far end. I didn't think much of it then. I just figured it was a slow night. I parked, shut down the engine, and was about to climb into my sleeper when something caught my eye. A woman was standing by that other truck, just standing there. Even from a distance, something seemed off. She was wearing this dirty beige coat that looked too big for her, and her hair was a tangled mess. It was below 40 degrees that night, but she didn't seem bothered by the cold. I'm not the type to get involved in other people's business, but something about her standing alone in an almost empty rest area that late at night didn't sit right with me. Maybe she needed help, you know? So I grabbed my flashlight and walked over. As I got closer, I called out, "Everything okay, ma'am?" She turned toward me, and I swear my blood went cold. Her eyes were wrong, wide open but vacant, like she was looking through me instead of at me. Her skin was pale, almost gray in the harsh parking lot lights. "I'm lost," she said, her voice raspy and thin. "I can't find my way home. I kept my distance. Highway Safety 101. "I can call someone for you," I offered, pulling out my phone. "Highway Patrol can give you a lift to the next town." That's when she changed. Her face twisted into this expression of pure panic. "No!" she screamed, backing away. "No police! He's coming for me! He'll find me!" I tried to calm her down, but she just kept backing away, her eyes darting around like she was watching for something in the darkness. "He's already here," she whispered. "He's everywhere." Then she turned and ran, not toward the main building or the highway, but straight into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I stood there, confused and unsettled. I called out after her, but she was gone. I thought about reporting it, but wasn't sure what to say. A frightened woman at a rest stop? Could be drugs, could be mental illness, could be domestic trouble. I decided I'd mention it to the attendant inside, but when I walked to the main building, it was locked up for the night. No attendant, no nothing. I couldn't sleep after that. I just sat in my cab, watching the darkness, half expecting her to emerge from the shadows. After about an hour of this, I figured I might as well keep driving. Sleep wasn't happening, and I suddenly didn't want to be there anymore. Back on the road, my CB radio crackled to life. This was strange because Channel 19 had been dead quiet all night. "Eastbound on I-10, you copy?" The voice was male, older, with that gravelly texture longtime smokers get. I picked up the mic. "This is eastbound. Go ahead. You just come from that rest area about 10 miles back?" My skin prickled. "Yeah, what about it?" There was a long pause, just static on the line. Then, "You see her? The woman?" My grip tightened on the wheel. "Yeah, I did. You know something about her?" Another pause. "Listen careful, driver. That ain't no lost traveler. That's something else. Something that don't belong on this road, or any road. You see her again, you keep moving. Don't stop, don't talk, just drive. She ain't looking for help, she's looking for company." I wanted to ask more, but the radio went silent. I tried calling back several times, but there was no response, just dead air. I told myself it was bullshit, some veteran driver having fun with the newcomers. But the woman's eyes kept flashing in my mind, and the old man's warning echoed in my ears. About 30 minutes later, the weather changed. Fog started rolling in, thick, soupy stuff that seemed to come out of nowhere. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The visibility dropped to almost nothing in minutes. I had my fog lights on, but they just created this weird glow that made it harder to see. That's when I saw her again. She was standing on the shoulder, right at the edge of my headlight's reach. Same coat, same wild hair. I blinked hard, thinking I was seeing things. But when I looked again, she was still there, her arm outstretched, thumb up like she was hitching a ride. The old man's warning burned in my mind, but I couldn't just leave someone on the highway in that fog. I started to slow down, and as I did, She turned to face my truck directly. Even through the fog and the distance, I could see her smile. It was too wide, too eager. I sped up instead of stopping. As I passed her, I glanced in my mirror, and I swear she was still looking right at me, her head turning to follow my truck. Then the fog swallowed her. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I needed to get somewhere with people, with lights. According to my GPS, there was a truck stop about 15 miles ahead. I pushed my rig as fast as I dared in the fog. The first whisper came through my radio. I thought it was static at first, just a hiss of white noise, but then I made out words. Help me find my way home. It was her voice. I know it was. But I hadn't given her my handle, and she didn't have a radio. I shut the damn thing off. The truck stop appeared like a beacon in the fog, a brightly lit oasis with a diner attached. I parked, my hands shaking so bad I could barely set the brake. I needed coffee, people, normality. The diner was almost empty, just a couple of local guys at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I took a booth by the window, ordered coffee, and tried to calm down. I even laughed at myself a little, getting spooked by some hitchhiker and an old trucker's ghost story. Real professional. I was halfway through my coffee when the bell over the door jingled. And there she was, the same woman in the same dirty coat with the same tangled hair. She stood in the doorway, scanning the diner until her eyes locked on mine. No one else seemed to notice her, not even the waitress. The woman smiled that too wide smile and walked, glided, toward my booth. "Found you," she whispered, though she was still by the door. Somehow I heard her like she was right next to me. "I need a ride home. Will you take me?" My mouth went dry. I looked around desperately, but no one was paying attention. It was like they couldn't see her at all. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. Her smile widened even further, stretching in a way that wasn't physically possible. "I'm lost. We're all lost. But you can join us. You can be with us." The lights flickered, once, twice. When they steadied, she was sitting across from me in the booth. Up close, her skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent. I could see darkness moving beneath it, like shadows flowing under ice. "What do you want?" I whispered. "Company," she said simply. "It's lonely out there in the fog. So lonely. No one stops anymore. No one helps. But you wanted to help, didn't you, Jake?" I never told her my name. Never. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In that moment of darkness, I felt cold fingers brush against my cheek. When the lights came back, she was gone. Everyone in the diner was staring at me, confused, like I'd been talking to myself. I threw money on the table and ran. Back in my truck, I was shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I had to get away, had to keep moving. As I pulled back onto the interstate, the fog was thicker than ever. And now there were shapes in it, vague, human-like forms that seemed to reach for my truck as I passed. The radio turned itself on, filling the cab with static and whispers. "Join us. Stay with us. We're so lonely." I shut it off. It turned back on. I yanked the damn thing out of the dash, but the voices continued, coming from everywhere and nowhere. More truck stops, more desperate attempts to find safety in numbers. But at each one, something would happen. Lights would flicker, and people would vanish mid-conversation. Or I'd see her reflection in windows, in mirrors, always watching, always smiling that impossible smile. At a gas station near El Paso, a young guy offered to help me when he saw how freaked out I was. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man," he said. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, he was gone. Just gone. No one else in the store seemed to notice or care. By the time I reached the outskirts of Dallas, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The fog had followed me the entire way, along with the whispers and the shapes. In a final desperate moment, I pulled over on the shoulder and screamed into the fog, "What do you want from me?" The fog parted, and there she was, but not alone. Behind her were others, dozens of them, with the same hollow eyes and gaunt features. Some wore modern clothes, others dressed from decades past. All had that same hungry look. "We want you," they said in unison. "We want your warmth, your life. It's so cold out here, so empty. Just pull over, just stop. It will be quick." I saw then what they really were: lost souls, trapped between worlds, desperate for company in their endless wandering. And they wanted me to join them. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I reached my delivery point. I quit that route the next day, told my company I'd take any job that didn't involve Interstate 10. But here's the thing, I still see her sometimes. In the rearview mirror when I'm driving at night, in the window of my bedroom when I'm trying to sleep, in the fog that sometimes rolls in without warning. And I still hear the whispers. We're waiting. We're always waiting. Everyone stops eventually. I don't know what I encountered on Interstate 10 that night. All I know is that something is out, there in the darkness beyond the headlights. Something that wears human faces and speaks with human voices, but isn't human at all. And it's still looking for company. Story 11. I've been hauling freight for almost 27 years now, driven through every kind of weather you can imagine. Hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, you name it. When you've logged as many miles as I have, you learn to handle just about anything the road throws at you. But what happened to me last winter on Route 77 in northern Nebraska? I still can't explain it. I'm not a superstitious guy, never have been. I'm posting this because I need to know if anyone else has seen what I saw. It was the second week of January, temperature hovering around 15 below zero, with the wind chill making it feel twice as cold. I was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Sioux City to Scottsbluff, a run I'd made dozens of times before. The forecast had called for snow, but nothing serious. Just another winter day in the Midwest, or so I thought. About 3 hours into my drive, the weather took a nasty turn. The wind picked up suddenly, snow started coming down in sheets, and visibility dropped to practically nothing. You know how it gets in a real blizzard, that white wall where you can barely see past your hood. I slowed down to about 30 miles per hour, both hands gripping the wheel tight, leaning forward like somehow that extra 3 inches would help me see better. The CB radio had gone quiet. Usually in weather like this, drivers are chattering non-stop, warning each other about conditions, jackknife trucks, anything to help fellow drivers. But there was nothing, just static. I tried a few times to raise someone, anyone, but got no response. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. I'd been creeping along for maybe 45 minutes in these conditions, totally alone on what's normally a decently traveled stretch of highway. My eyes were burning from the strain of trying to see through the whiteout. That's when I first noticed them. 2 dim red lights floating in the distance ahead of me. Taillights, I figured. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't the only idiot out in this mess. As I got closer, though, something felt off. The taillights weren't moving. They were just sitting there, dead center in my lane. I tapped my brakes, slowing even more, and flashed my high beams a couple times. Nothing happened. The truck, I could make out its shape now, just sat there, right in the middle of the highway. I came to a stop about 20 feet behind it, my hazards blinking, and stared through my windshield. It wasn't a modern semi. Hell, it wasn't even from this century, as far as I could tell. It looked like one of those old cab-over models from the 50s or 60s, but in terrible condition. The kind you'd see in a junkyard or a museum, not on an interstate highway. The paint was gone, replaced by rust that covered most of the body. No company logo, no dot numbers, nothing. And something else struck me as wrong. No exhaust. In weather this cold, you'd see clouds billowing from the stack, but there was nothing. No sign the engine was running at all. No hazard lights either, just those dim red tail lights that seemed to barely penetrate the swirling snow. Common sense told me to stay put and call for help, but my phone showed no service. The CB was still dead silent. And what if some other driver came barreling through the storm and plowed right into us? I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my heavy coat, flashlight, and gloves, then climbed down from my cab. The wind hit me like a physical blow, nearly knocking me sideways. The snow stung my face, tiny ice needles driven by the gale. I pulled my hat lower and started trudging toward the abandoned truck, one arm up to shield my eyes. As I got closer, I noticed there was no snow built up on the vehicle. In a storm this intense, it should have been covered in white within minutes of stopping, but the metal was bare, like the snow was avoiding it somehow. I circled around to the driver's side, my boots crunching in the snow. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a figure slumped over the wheel. My heart started pounding harder. Was the driver hurt? Unconscious? Dead? I banged on the window with my flashlight. "Hey, you all right in there?" I shouted, but my voice seemed to disappear into the howling wind. No response, no movement. I tried the door handle, but it was frozen shut. I banged harder on the window, the sound oddly muffled in the storm. "Hey, can you hear me? You need to move your truck." That's when it happened. The door didn't open so much as it just came loose. It swung outward with a long, grinding creak that I felt in my teeth more than heard. No one had pulled the handle. It just opened, like the truck itself was responding to me. The figure inside slowly straightened up. Even now, months later, I struggle to describe what I saw. It was shaped like a man, tall and impossibly thin in a dark coat that looked like it might disintegrate if you touched it. But his face, God, his face. Skin so pale it was almost blue, stretched tight over his skull like plastic wrap. No wrinkles, no stubble, nothing that made it look human. And his eyes, they were just empty. Not empty like vacant or staring. Empty like there was nothing there at all. Just black holes where eyes should be. He turned toward me with a movement that was too smooth, too fluid. No stiffness from the cold or from sitting, like watching something underwater. I stood there frozen, not from the cold, but from a fear I'd never experienced before. This thing, I can't call it a man, didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at me with those holes where eyes should be. Then he started to get out of the truck. One long, thin leg extended down to the snow, but left no footprint where it touched. I backed away, nearly falling on the icy pavement. The figure unfolded itself from the cab, standing to a height that seemed impossible. 7 feet at least. Its arms hung too low, fingers too long. It took a step toward me. No sound, no breath coming from its mouth in the freezing air. Just silence as it moved. I didn't think. I turned and ran, slipping and sliding back to my truck. I've never moved so fast in my life. I scrambled up into my cab, slammed the door, and locked it, as if a lock would stop whatever that thing was. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. Through my side mirror, I could see it walking toward me, not hurrying. Just that same smooth, gliding stride, like it knew it had all the time in the world. The engine roared to life, I threw it into gear and hit the gas, tires spinning on the ice before finding purchase. I didn't care about safety anymore. I just needed to get away. My truck fishtailed dangerously as I accelerated, but I kept my foot down, watching the figure in my mirror growing smaller. For the next 20 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see those empty eyes following me. But there was nothing except the swirling white of the storm. Eventually, I made it to a truck stop in the next town, Ainsworth, I think. I pulled in, still shaking, and stumbled inside. The place was packed with drivers waiting out the storm. Warm, normal, human faces. The contrast to what I'd just seen hit me hard, and I nearly broke down right there. I found a seat at the counter and ordered coffee, trying to get my hands to stop trembling. When I felt like I could speak without my voice cracking, I asked the waitress if anyone had reported problems on Route 77, maybe an abandoned truck. She looked at me strangely and said the highway had been closed for hours due to the storm. No one should have been out there at all. I tried asking some of the other drivers. None had heard anything on their CBs about a stranded truck. One old-timer looked at me funny when I described the vintage model I'd seen. "Ain't been a rig like that on the road in 40 years, he said. "You sure you saw what you think you saw?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I stayed at that truck stop until the storm passed, almost 14 hours later. When the plows finally cleared Route 77, I convinced another driver to come back with me to where I'd seen the truck. There was nothing there. No tire tracks except my own leading away from the scene. No evidence that anything had been parked in the middle of the road. I completed my delivery a day late, made up some excuse about mechanical problems. I couldn't bring myself to tell my dispatcher what really happened. Who would believe me? Since then, I've driven Route 77 a dozen times, always in daylight, always in good weather. I've never seen any sign of that rusted truck or its driver. Sometimes I've convinced myself it was just a hallucination brought on by stress and the whiteout conditions. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in a blizzard, right? But last week, I was heading back north as another storm was rolling in. The snow wasn't heavy yet, but the sky had that ominous gray-green color that promises something nasty. As I rounded a bend, I saw them in the distance, two dim red lights through the first flurries of snow. My blood went cold. I slowed down, heart hammering in my chest. It was just another semi, a normal modern Peterbilt that passed me going the opposite direction. The driver gave me a wave. I nearly cried with relief. But now winter's coming around again, and I've got more runs scheduled through Nebraska. Every time the weather report mentions snow, I feel that same cold dread, because I know what's out there, waiting in the blizzard. I know those empty eyes are watching for me, and I can't shake the feeling that next time I won't get away so easily. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if it was ever human or if it just looked that way. All I know is that sometimes, when the snow is falling and visibility drops, I find myself searching the road ahead for those dim red lights, wondering if they're searching for me too. Story 12. I've lived in Ashbrook for 8 months now, and I still don't know if what happened to me was real or if I've completely lost my mind. I need to write this down because I can't talk about it. My hands are shaking even now as I type this. I moved here last February after landing a remote software development job. I wanted somewhere quiet, away from the constant noise and expense of Boston. Ashbrook seemed perfect. Small, peaceful, affordable, with decent internet, and those picture-perfect New England woods surrounding everything. I found a little cottage-style house at the edge of town, backing right up to the forest. The rent was surprisingly cheap, which should have been my first clue something wasn't right. The locals were friendly enough, but there was always this weird hesitation when I'd mention how much I loved hiking in the woods behind my place. At first, I thought they were just being protective of their secret spots or something. It wasn't until I was chatting with Bill at the hardware store about 3 months after moving in that someone finally said anything directly. "You're not going in those woods after sunset, are you?" he asked while ringing up my purchases. I laughed. "Sometimes. The sunset view from Miller's Ridge is amazing." His face went serious. "Listen, David, I know you're not from around here, but there's a reason nobody goes in those woods after dark." I thought he was joking. "What, like bears? I make plenty of noise." "Not bears," he said, leaning forward. "The Watcher." I couldn't help rolling my eyes. Every small town has these silly legends to scare kids and tourists. Bill must have noticed my expression because he just shook his head and handed me my receipt. "Just stay out of the woods at night, city boy. Some things you don't need to learn the hard way." Over the next few months, I heard variations of the same warning from other locals. The librarian, the woman at the coffee shop, even the mailman, all of them mentioning this watcher in the woods with the same uncomfortable seriousness. According to their stories, people who ventured into the forest after dark would either come back changed or not come back at all. It was ridiculous. I'd been hiking those woods for months, sometimes returning well after dark, and never seen anything more threatening than a startled raccoon. I figured it was just small-town superstition, something to make their ordinary lives feel more interesting. That was until October 12th. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd spent part of the afternoon on a video call with her. By the time we finished talking, it was late afternoon, around 5 o'clock. The autumn air was crisp, and the forest behind my house was a spectacular patchwork of red and gold. I decided to take a walk to clear my head after sitting at my computer all day. The sun was starting to set as I entered the woods, but I wasn't concerned. I knew these trails well by now, and I had my phone with a flashlight app. The temperature was dropping, so I zipped up my jacket and headed toward my favorite lookout point, about 30 minutes into the forest. The woods were unusually quiet that evening. Normally there would be birds, squirrels, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. But everything seemed still, like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the changing season, but something about the silence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was about 20 minutes in when I noticed something odd through the trees, a faint light flickering in the distance. It wasn't bright enough to be a campfire, more like the glow of a lantern or an oil lamp. It was strange because I'd never seen anyone else this deep in the woods before, especially not as evening approached. Common sense told me to ignore it and head back home, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was a lost hiker, or perhaps someone had built a cabin out here that I hadn't noticed before. I veered off the path, following the light. As I got closer, the light seemed to grow steadier. Through the trees, I could make out the shape of what looked like a small cabin. How had I never seen this before? I'd hiked these woods dozens of times. The cabin looked old, with weathered wood siding and a sagging roof. One window was illuminated, casting that yellowish glow I'd seen from the distance. Standing in front of the cabin, I felt a sudden wave of unease wash over me. Something about this place felt wrong, like it didn't belong here, or maybe like I didn't belong here. The rational part of my brain said to turn around and leave, but instead, I found myself moving toward the door. I knocked, not expecting an answer. When none came, I tested the handle. The door creaked open with surprising ease. "Hello?" I called out, poking my head inside. Is anyone here? The interior was a single room, dimly lit by an old oil lamp sitting on a small table. The air inside was stale and carried a sickly sweet smell that made my stomach turn, like rotting meat mixed with something I couldn't identify. There was minimal furniture, the table with the lamp, a rickety wooden chair, and a narrow bed against the far wall. And on that bed sat a man. Except man isn't the right word for what I saw. The figure was humanoid, but emaciated beyond anything I'd ever seen, like skin stretched over bones with nothing in between. His face was gaunt, cheeks sunken so deeply that his face looked almost skull-like. His eyes were dark hollows, and when he opened his mouth to speak, I could see blackened teeth, some missing entirely. "Welcome," he croaked, his voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "I've been waiting for you." Terror shot through me like an electric current. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. How could he have been waiting for me when I'd decided to walk this way on a whim? I backed toward the door, not taking my eyes off him. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll be going now." I reached behind me for the door handle, but as my fingers touched the cold metal, the door slammed shut with such force that the entire cabin shook. I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "You can't leave," the skeletal man said, rising from the bed. His movements were wrong, jerky and fluid at the same time, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "The Watcher won't let you." He began moving toward me, his bony limbs carrying him across the floor with unnatural speed. His fingers were extended toward me, yellowed nails curved like claws. My mind was screaming. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. But the fear in my body was very real as I scrambled away from him, knocking over the chair in the process. "Who are you?" I gasped, backing up until I hit the wall. "What do you want?" "I am nothing," he replied, his voice somehow coming from everywhere in the room at once. "The Watcher is everything, and the Watcher wants you." My eyes darted around the room, looking for any escape. The window, the one that had been glowing from outside, was my only chance. I grabbed the fallen chair, holding it between us like a lion tamer. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice breaking with fear. The man, or whatever he was, tilted his head at an impossible angle, like his neck had additional joints. His mouth stretched into a grin that was far too wide for a human face. "The Watcher sees you even when you're not in the woods, David," he said. "The Watcher has always seen you." How did he know my name? I hadn't told him. I hadn't told anyone in these woods my name. While he was speaking, I made my move. I threw the chair at him and lunged for the window. It was small, but I was desperate enough to think I could fit through it. I climbed onto the table beneath it, sending the oil lamp crashing to the floor. The flame extinguished immediately, plunging the cabin into darkness, except for the faint moonlight coming through the window. I pushed the window open and was halfway through when I felt something grab my ankle. The grip was impossibly strong, like a vice clamping around my leg. I looked down to see those skeletal fingers wrapped around my ankle, the emaciated man staring up at me with eyes that now seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "The Watcher isn't finished with you," he hissed. Pure adrenaline surged through me. I kicked wildly with my free leg, connecting with what I think was his face. There was a sickening crunch, and his grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I squirmed through the window, scraping my chest and arms on the rough frame, and fell to the ground outside. I didn't wait to see if he would follow. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from, so I just ran downhill, hoping it would lead me back to town. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but the thought of that thing catching up to me kept me going. Several times I thought I heard something moving through the woods behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Eventually, I broke through the tree line and saw the lights of Ashbrook in the distance. I staggered down the road toward town, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally reached my house, I locked every door and window, then collapsed on my porch swing, unable to bring myself to go inside just yet. I needed to be under the open sky, away from any enclosed spaces where I might feel trapped again. That's where they found me the next morning. Bill from the hardware store and the sheriff. Apparently, I'd been sitting there all night, staring at the woods. Bill said he'd been driving by on his way to open the store and saw me looking not right. I must have told them something about the cabin because later that day, the sheriff took me and a couple of deputies back into the woods to find it. I was terrified to go back, but even more afraid of being left alone. We searched for hours. I led them to where I thought the cabin should be, but there was nothing there. No structure, no foundation, not even a clearing. Just more trees and underbrush, like nothing had ever been there at all. The sheriff suggested I might have gotten turned around in the dark, so we expanded our search. We never found any cabin. According to the town records and the sheriff's knowledge, there had never been any structures built in that part of the forest. They all looked at me with pity and concern. The sheriff suggested I might have experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or dehydration. Maybe I'd fallen and hit my head. The explanation was almost believable, except for one thing: the bruises on my ankle. 5 distinct marks, like fingers, had gripped me there with crushing force, and my torn clothes and the scratches on my arms and chest from squeezing through the window. It's been 2 weeks now. I haven't gone back into the woods, not even during daylight. I've started seeing a therapist in the next town over, but I haven't told her the full story. How could I? She'd think I was completely insane. Sometimes at night, I think I see a light flickering between the trees at the edge of the forest, and sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I swear I can hear a voice whispering, "The Watcher isn't finished with you. I'm putting my house up for sale next week. I don't care if I lose money on it. I can't stay in Ashbrook anymore." But part of me wonders if it will matter where I go. Because what if the skeletal man was telling the truth? What if the Watcher can see me wherever I am? Story 13. I never believed in haunted houses or supernatural stuff before moving to Millfield. I was so excited about my new job and the chance to own my first home in what seemed like the perfect little town. The real estate prices were surprisingly affordable compared to the city, and I managed to snag this beautiful 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch for less than what a 1-bedroom apartment would cost back home. It was early September when I moved in, and the whole town was picture perfect. Trees beginning to turn golden, kids riding bikes after school, neighbors walking dogs. Everyone I met during my first week was friendly and welcoming. Everyone except the elderly couple directly across the street. The Bakers. That's what my next-door neighbor called them when I asked. "Oh, they keep to themselves," she said with a dismissive wave. "Been here forever. Don't take it personally." But it was hard not to take it personally when I'd catch them watching me. And I mean watching. Not the casual glance of neighbors acknowledging each other. Mrs. Baker would stand at her living room window, curtains slightly pulled aside, just staring. Mr. Baker would be out gardening, whenever I brought in groceries or checked my mail, but he never actually seemed to do any yard work. He'd just stand there, pruning shears in hand, eyes following my every move. They never waved, never smiled, never even nodded in acknowledgement when I'd raise my hand in greeting. Just watched. I tried to brush it off. Some people are just odd, right? Maybe they were suspicious of newcomers. Small towns can be like that sometimes. The first strange thing happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. It was just after midnight, and I was drifting off to sleep when I heard 3 distinct knocks on my front door. Loud, deliberate knocks. I jumped up, heart racing. Who would be at my door at this hour? I threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, flipping on the porch light before cautiously peeking through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. I opened the door anyway, thinking maybe they'd stepped away or moved to the side. The porch was empty. The street was silent. Nothing but crickets and the distant hum of someone's air conditioner. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. No response. I chalked it up to neighborhood kids playing pranks and went back to bed, though it took me ages to fall asleep. The next night, same thing. 3 knocks, precisely at midnight. Again, no one was there when I checked. By the 3rd night, I was prepared. I sat in my darkened living room, lights off, waiting. At exactly midnight, the knocks came. I sprang to my feet and yanked the door open immediately. The porch was empty. I stepped outside this time, looking around. The baker's house was dark, except for a single light in an upstairs window. As I stared, I swear I saw the curtain move, just slightly. The knocking continued every night for a week. I eventually stopped checking. What was the point? But then the whispering started. It began as indistinct murmurs outside my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe late-night conversations from neighbors' yards carrying over. But each night, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. I couldn't make out full sentences, just fragments. "Shouldn't be here. Not right. The house knows." I started sleeping with earplugs, but somehow the whispers penetrated even those. One night, I distinctly heard a child's voice say, "It's watching you." I shot up in bed, ripping out my earplugs and rushing to the window. Again, nothing but darkness, except for that single light across the street in the baker's house. After almost 3 weeks of this, I was exhausted and increasingly paranoid. The lack of sleep was affecting my work, and I kept feeling like I was being observed, even inside my own home. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. I'd wake up feeling like someone had been standing over me while I slept. I finally decided to confront the bakers. Maybe they knew something about the history of my house, or maybe, though it seemed ridiculous, they were somehow responsible for what was happening. I crossed the street one evening after work, heart pounding as I approached their meticulously maintained home. Their yard was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, with not a leaf or twig out of place. The paint on their house looked fresh, though the style was decidedly outdated. I knocked on their door, surprised by how my hand trembled. After a long moment, the door opened just enough for Mrs. Baker's face to appear in the gap. She was older than I'd realized, deep wrinkles mapping her pale face, her eyes a washed-out blue that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Mrs. Baker, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm your new neighbor from across the street, and I've been experiencing some strange—" "You shouldn't have come here," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't belong in that house." I blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" "That house doesn't want you," she continued, eyes never leaving mine. "It's never wanted any of you." Before I could respond, the door closed in my face. I stood there, stunned, before slowly backing away and returning home. That night, the knocking was louder than ever, the whispers more insistent. But something new happened too. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of something being dragged across my porch. Gathering my courage, I went downstairs and peeked through the front window. My stomach dropped. Smeared across my porch were muddy footprints, small ones, like a child's. They led right up to my door, then disappeared, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply vanished. It hadn't rained in weeks. Where had the mud come from? I didn't sleep the rest of that night, or the next. I started researching my house online, looking for any history of deaths or tragedies, but found nothing unusual. The previous owners had stayed for only 8 months before moving out abruptly. Before them, another family had lasted just over a year. The pattern continued back for decades. No one stayed long. Why hadn't my real estate agent mentioned this? 5 weeks after moving in, things escalated dramatically. I was in my kitchen making dinner when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps crossing what would be my bedroom floor. I froze, knife in hand, listening. The steps continued, moving toward the hallway, then stopping at what would be the top of the stairs. I couldn't breathe. I lived alone. There should be no one upstairs. I should have run, called the police, done anything but what I actually did, which was to grab a flashlight and slowly ascend the stairs, kitchen knife clutched in my shaking hand. The upstairs hallway was empty and still. My bedroom door was closed, though I always left it open. Heart hammering in my chest, I pushed it open with the knife hand, flashlight beam darting around the room. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing seemed out of place, but the temperature was noticeably colder than the rest of the house. I checked the other rooms, guest bedroom, bathroom, home office, all empty, all undisturbed. I was about to head back downstairs, convincing myself I'd imagined the footsteps, when I remembered the attic. I rarely thought about it. The access was a small hatch in the ceiling at the end of the hall, with a pull-down ladder. I'd glanced up there once when I first moved in and saw nothing but empty space and old insulation. Standing beneath the hatch now, I could see it wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar, enough that someone could have pushed it open from above. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight. Every instinct told me to leave, to get out of the house and never come back. But some irrational part of me needed to know. I reached up with the flashlight handle and pushed the hatch. It swung upward easily, and the folding ladder descended with a creak that seemed deafening in the silence. I stood frozen, listening for any sound from above. Nothing. I ascended the ladder slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness of the attic, revealing the expected jumble of old insulation, exposed beams, and dust. But then my light caught something unexpected. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a chimney stack, was what looked like a makeshift sleeping area. A dirty, thin mattress lay on the floor, surrounded by empty food wrappers and water bottles. A small pile of clothing, children's clothing, was neatly folded beside it. And on the wall above the mattress, scratched into the plaster with what must have been a knife or sharp tool, was a single word: leave. I nearly fell backwards off the ladder in my rush to get down. I ran to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The police arrived quickly. 2 officers searched the house thoroughly, including the attic. They confirmed what I'd seen. Someone had been living up there. Based on the food wrappers and the state of the mattress, They estimated it had been occupied recently, possibly within days. Could be a homeless person who found a way in, one officer suggested. We've seen cases like this before. They find an empty house or one where the owners are at work all day and they set up camp. But I've been living here for over a month, I protested. How could I not notice someone coming and going? The officer shrugged. Attic access from outside, maybe? We'll check the perimeter. They found nothing. No broken windows, no forced entries, no outside access to the attic. They took some photos, filed a report, and told me to change my locks and consider installing a security system. They didn't seem particularly concerned, which only made me feel more insane. After they left, I couldn't bear to stay in the house. I threw some clothes in a bag and headed to a motel for the night. As I was getting into my car, I noticed the Bakers watching from their porch, not hiding behind curtains now, standing openly, observing. I don't know what possessed me, but I marched across the street toward them. Their expressions didn't change as I approached. No surprise, no concern, nothing. Did you know? I demanded. Did you know someone was living in my attic? Mrs. Baker's face remained impassive. The house has a way of keeping people, she said, her voice eerily calm. It doesn't let them leave. Once you move in, the house decides if you belong, and if it doesn't like you, it finds ways to make sure you don't stay. Mr. Baker nodded slowly beside her. No one stays long in that house, not since the Millers. The house was built for them. It only wants them. The Millers? I repeated. Who are the Millers? But they just turned and went inside, closing the door firmly behind them. I spent that night at the motel researching the Millers and my house's history. Finally, in an old digitized newspaper from the 1950s, I found it. A story about the Miller family. Thomas and Edith Miller and their son James had lived in my house for nearly 30 years. The parents had died of natural causes within months of each other, but the son had disappeared mysteriously at age 10. His body was never found. I never spent another night in that house. I called my boss the next morning, made up a family emergency, and left town that day. I abandoned most of my belongings, only taking what I could fit in my car. I broke my lease, took the financial hit, and moved 3 states away. That was 4 years ago. I've never gone back to Millfield. I found a new job, a new apartment in a busy city with lots of people and noise and life. I should feel safe here, but sometimes, usually when I'm just drifting off to sleep, I hear it. 3 distinct knocks. And even though I know it's just my mind playing tricks, I can't help but feel that the house is still watching me, still waiting for me to come back. Because sometimes, when I look out my window late at night, I catch a glimpse of what looks like a child's face peering back at me from the darkness. And I know somehow that the house isn't done with me yet. Story 14. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me 3 months ago. I've barely slept since then. I keep going over it in my head, wondering if I imagined it all. But I know what I experienced was real. I've never been the type to believe in the supernatural or anything like that. But after what happened on that desert highway, I don't know what to believe anymore. I was driving from Houston to Los Angeles for a job interview. It was a long drive, but I couldn't afford a plane ticket, and I figured I could make it in 3 days if I pushed myself. I'd been on the road for almost 72 hours, stopping only for gas, fast food, and the occasional nap at rest stops. By the 3rd day, I was running on energy drinks and those gas station caffeine pills. The sun was starting to set as I hit this stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. The radio kept cutting in and out, mostly static with occasional bursts of music or talk shows. It was just me, the fading daylight, and miles of empty desert on either side of the road. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a mirage or something. This young woman standing on the side of the road with her thumb out. She was wearing a simple white sundress that seemed to glow against the darkening landscape. Her hair was long and dark, blowing slightly in the wind. As I got closer, I could see she was maybe in her early 20s. I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers. Everyone knows that's how horror movies start. But something about seeing her alone in the middle of the desert as night was falling bothered me. I drove past her, watching her shrink in my rearview mirror, but the guilt started eating at me immediately. What if something happened to her out there? What if she was stranded? The nearest town was at least 50 miles away. After a few minutes of arguing with myself, I made a U-turn and headed back. When my headlights found her again, she was in the exact same spot, still holding her thumb out. She hadn't moved an inch. It was like she knew I'd come back. I pulled over about 10 feet ahead of her and rolled down the passenger window as she approached. Up close, there was something off about her. Her movements were slightly jerky, like someone who was exhausted or maybe on something. Her face was pretty but oddly blank, and her eyes seemed hollow, like they weren't really focusing on anything. "Where you headed?" I asked. "West," she said, her voice soft and raspy, like she hadn't spoken in a long time. "I'm going to LA. I can take you as far as you need." She nodded and got in without another word. No backpack, no purse, nothing. Just her in that white dress. I noticed her hands were fidgeting in her lap, her fingers twitching slightly. I tried making small talk as we drove, asked her name, where she was coming from, the usual stuff. She gave one-word answers or just nodded. I figured she was just tired or wary of strangers, which was fair enough. After a while, I gave up and just focused on driving. About 30 minutes passed in silence. The sun had completely set by then, and the darkness out there was absolute. No street lights, no houses, just the narrow tunnel of my headlights cutting through the pitch black. That's when she started talking about the voices. "They sing to me," she said suddenly, making me jump a little. "Out here in the dark, they've been singing for a long time." I glanced over at her, trying to keep my eyes on the road. "What voices?" She didn't answer. Instead, she started humming. It was this weird, atonal melody that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had the radio on low, just some pop station I'd found, but somehow her humming seemed to layer over it, like it was following the song but twisting it into something else. I turned the radio up a bit, hoping she'd stop, but she just hummed louder. There was something about that sound that felt wrong, like it wasn't coming just from her, but from somewhere else too. I swear I could feel it vibrating in my chest. "Where did you say you were from?" I asked, trying to change the subject, to break whatever weird spell was happening. She stopped humming abruptly and turned to look at me. In the glow from the dashboard, her face looked different somehow. Her eyes seemed darker, deeper. "They're coming," she said, and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, showed too many teeth. My heart started pounding. I was suddenly very aware of how alone we were out there, how far from anything. My phone had lost signal hours ago. "I think I need to stop for gas," I lied, even though my tank was 3/4 full. "There should be a station coming up soon." "No stations," she said, still smiling that wrong smile. "No stops, just road." That's when I lost it. Whatever was happening, whatever she was, I wanted her out of my car immediately. "Look, I'm sorry, but I need you to get out," I said, pulling over to the shoulder. The car filled with the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. She didn't move, just kept staring at me with that smile. "Get out!" I shouted, reaching across her to open her door. That's when she grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold, like touching a corpse. Her grip was impossibly strong. I couldn't pull away. "They're already here," she whispered, but it didn't sound like just her voice anymore. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, some high, some low, all saying the same words. When I looked at her face, her eyes were completely black. Not just the iris or pupil, but the entire eye. Black and endless like the desert night outside. I screamed and yanked my arm free with strength I didn't know I had. I fumbled with my seatbelt and practically fell out of the driver's side door. I didn't even grab my keys or phone. I just ran. The desert ground was uneven, and I stumbled several times, expecting her to come after me. But when I looked back, she wasn't following. She was still in the car, watching me through the windshield. Even from that distance, I could see those black eyes reflecting the dashboard lights. Then I heard it, the singing. It started soft, like a whisper on the wind, coming from everywhere and nowhere. A chorus of voices, some sounding like children, others like old men and women, all singing in a language I couldn't understand. The melody was similar to what she'd been humming, but fuller now, more complete. I froze, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be all around me, coming from the darkness itself. I spun in a circle, squinting into the night, but there was nothing to see, just blackness beyond the faint glow of my car's headlights. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The road. It had changed. When I'd been driving, it was a normal two-lane highway stretching east to west. Now, from where I stood, it seemed to curve impossibly, like a giant loop. I could see my car's headlights shining, but the road they illuminated seemed to bend back on itself in a way that defied logic. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was exhaustion playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the road was still wrong. It was like one of those optical illusions where the perspective is impossible, and the singing was getting louder. I stumbled back toward my car, figuring I'd at least be safer inside than out in the open. But as I approached, I saw that the passenger seat was empty. The hitchhiker was gone. For a split second, I felt relief. Maybe I could just get in and drive away from this nightmare. But when I reached for the door handle, I heard her voice right behind me. "No one leaves the road." I whirled around, but there was no one there. Just darkness. The singing swelled, drowning out the sound of my panicked breathing. I yanked the car door open and jumped inside, locking all the doors and starting the engine. The familiar rumble gave me a moment of comfort. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I drove fast, way over the speed limit, desperate to find a town, a gas station, another car, anything. But the road just kept going. I drove for what felt like hours, the gas gauge never moving from 3/4 full, the dashboard clock frozen at 11:27 p.m. The singing followed me, sometimes fading to a whisper, sometimes swelling until it seemed to be coming from inside the car itself. Occasionally, I'd see her in my peripheral vision, a flash of white in the passenger seat, a glimpse of long dark hair in the rearview mirror. Each time when I'd look directly, there'd be nothing there, just empty space and that endless singing. At one point, I saw lights ahead. Relief flooded through me. Civilization. But as I got closer, I realized it was my own car. Somehow, impossibly, I was seeing my own headlights from behind, even though I was the one driving. The road had looped back on itself again. I stopped the car and got out, screaming into the darkness, begging for help, for answers, for the singing to stop. The only response was the voices, growing louder, seeming to come closer. In desperation, I tried walking away from the road straight into the desert. But no matter how far I walked, the road was always right there, just a few feet away. I couldn't escape it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I collapsed back into my car and must have passed out. When I woke up, it was daylight. The singing had stopped. The road looked normal again, just a straight highway cutting through the desert. My phone had signal. The clock was working. Everything seemed back to normal. I convinced myself it had all been some kind of hallucination from sleep deprivation and too much caffeine. I drove to the nearest town, checked into a motel, and slept for 15 hours straight. The next day, I continued to LA like nothing had happened. I even got the job I was interviewing for. I've been working there for 3 months now, trying to forget that night. But here's the thing. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home, the radio will cut out. And in that moment of silence, I can hear it, that humming, that melody. And when I look in my rearview mirror, I swear I can see her sitting in my back seat, her hollow eyes watching me, her fingers twitching in time to a song only she can fully hear. And the worst part? Every time I try to drive back to Houston to visit my family, the GPS always routes me away from that desert highway. When I ignore it and try to take that road anyway, I always end up somewhere else. It's like that stretch of highway doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe it does exist, but it's not on any map. Maybe it's waiting for me to find it again. Maybe she's still there, standing on the side of the road with her thumb out, waiting for the next driver who'll feel guilty enough to turn around and pick her up. Sometimes I wonder if I ever actually left that road at all. Story 15. I've been a trucker for 13 years now, spent most of my life on the road, seen pretty much everything you'd expect. Accidents, strange hitchhikers, weird truck stop encounters, you name it. But what happened to me last November on that stretch of California highway still keeps me up at night. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone, and my wife is tired of hearing me wake up in cold sweats. I was hauling a load from Dallas to Sacramento, nothing special, just electronics headed for distribution. I'd been driving for about 16 hours with a few short breaks, and it was getting close to midnight. I was on this lonely stretch of highway that cuts through some hills. Locals call it the Phantom Highway because of how isolated and dark it gets. Cell service is spotty, and there are these long stretches where you won't see another vehicle for an hour or more. The moon was nearly full that night, casting this eerie glow over everything. It was cold too, unseasonably cold for California, with this biting wind that seemed to find its way into my cab despite the heater working overtime. I remember checking my GPS and seeing I had about 4 more hours until I could stop for the night at this rest area I always use. That's when I saw it, a small flickering light off to the side of the road. At first I thought it might be a reflection from something, but as I got closer, I realized it was a small fire, and standing next to it was a woman in white, just standing there, not moving, staring at the highway. Now, I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers. 13 years on the road teaches you that much, but something about seeing someone out there in the middle of nowhere, especially with how cold it was getting, made me slow down. I remember my breath catching as my headlights fully illuminated her. She was wearing this thin white dress that looked completely inappropriate for the weather, with long dark hair that was blowing slightly in the wind. She couldn't have been more than 30. I pulled over about 50 feet ahead of her. In my side mirror, I watched her slowly turn toward my truck, the fire still flickering behind her. The sensible part of my brain was screaming at me to just drive on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that she needed help. I rolled down my window as she approached. Up close, her face looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "You need help, miss," I called out. She looked up at me with these intense eyes. "My friends left me," she said, her voice barely audible over the idling engine. "We were camping and they just left. Can you give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but the temperature was dropping fast, and I couldn't just leave her out there. I unlocked the passenger door. "I can take you to the next rest stop. There's a diner there that's open all night." She climbed in without saying anything else. The moment she sat down, this overwhelming cold seemed to fill the cab. I cranked the heater up, thinking maybe she'd brought the outside air in with her, but it didn't help much. "I'm Jackson," I said, trying to break the silence as I pulled back onto the highway. She just nodded, staring straight ahead. "Thanks for stopping," she finally said after a long pause. "Not many people drive this road anymore." I remember thinking that was odd. It wasn't a major interstate, but it wasn't exactly abandoned either. "Where were you camping?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Just off the road. We come here every year." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Or we used to." The cab felt like it was getting colder by the minute. I checked the heater again. It was blasting at full power, but it felt like it was doing nothing. I rubbed my hands together, noticing my breath was starting to fog in front of me. "Are you not cold?" I asked, noticing she wasn't shivering despite her thin dress. She turned to look at me, and for a split second, I swear her eyes caught the light from the dashboard in a way that made them look completely hollow. "I don't feel it anymore," she said simply. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. The whole time I kept glancing over at her, but she just stared straight ahead, occasionally looking out the window like she was searching for something. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, but the signal kept cutting in and out, static interrupting every few minutes. That's when I saw it. A semi-truck parked sideways across both lanes about a quarter-mile ahead. No lights, no hazards, nothing. Just blocking the entire road. "What the hell?" I muttered, slowing down. I flashed my brights, but there was no movement around the truck. It looked completely abandoned. I stopped about 100 feet away and put on my hazards. "I need to check this out," I told the woman. "Stay here." She didn't respond, just kept staring ahead at the truck with this strange, knowing expression. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and climbed down from the cab. The night air hit me like a wall of ice, making me zip my jacket up to my chin. As I approached the abandoned truck, I noticed there were no skid marks on the pavement, no signs of an accident. It was like someone had just parked it there and walked away. The driver's door was ajar. I shined my light inside but saw nothing unusual, just an empty cab with some papers on the passenger seat. The engine was cold. This truck had been here for hours. I walked around to the front, checking for damage, but there was nothing. Then I noticed something strange. There were no license plates, not on the front, and when I checked, not on the back either. The side of the trailer was completely blank too. No company name, no dot number, nothing. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was very wrong here. I decided to call Highway Patrol, but when I pulled out my phone, there was no signal, not even one bar. That's when I heard the sound of my own truck door opening. I spun around and saw the woman had gotten out. She was standing next to my truck, staring past me with an expression of absolute terror. "Get back in the truck," I shouted, already jogging back toward her. She slowly raised her arm, pointing behind me. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice somehow carrying across the distance between us. I turned around, and that's when I saw them, figures emerging from the darkness behind the abandoned truck. At first, I thought they were people, maybe the driver and some passengers. But as they moved into the moonlight, I realized something was off about them. They moved wrong, too fluid and yet too stiff at the same time. And their faces, I couldn't make out any features. It was like looking at smudged photographs. I ran the rest of the way back to my truck, grabbed the woman by the arm, and practically shoved her back into the cab. Her skin was ice cold, but I barely registered it in my panic. I jumped in, slammed the door, and hit the gas, steering onto the shoulder to get around the abandoned truck. As we passed it, I glanced in my mirror and saw the figures just standing there in the middle of the road, watching us drive away. The abandoned truck was gone, completely gone, like it had never been there at all. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my hands shaking on the wheel. Who were those people? The woman was hugging herself, rocking slightly in the seat. "They're angry," she said quietly. "They want to know what happened to them." "What are you talking about? Who are they?" She turned to look at me, and in the green glow of the dashboard lights, her face looked gaunt, almost skeletal. "They're lost, like me." My blood ran cold. I pushed the truck as fast as it would go, the engine protesting as I hit 90 on a road rated for 65. Every few seconds, I checked the mirrors, terrified I'd see those figures somehow keeping pace with us. After about 15 minutes of driving in tense silence, I saw the lights of a rest area ahead. I'd never been so happy to see a truck stop in my life. I pulled in and parked under the brightest light I could find, next to a couple of other semis. The place wasn't busy, just a small convenience store, a diner that was closed for the night, and a few trucks whose drivers were probably sleeping. I shut off the engine and turned to the woman, determined to get some answers. That's when I noticed the temperature in the cab had plummeted even further. I could see my breath clearly now, coming out in thick white clouds. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" She looked at me with those hollow eyes. "I got separated," she said, as if that explained everything. "From my friends. We were camping, celebrating. There was an accident." She trailed off, looking out the window. "That was a long time ago. I've been trying to find them ever since." "What do you mean, a long time ago?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer, already felt the truth creeping up my spine like ice water. "I don't know anymore. The years blend together when you're in between." She turned back to me, and for a moment, her face seemed to flicker like a television with bad reception. "I need to find them so I can move on. I need someone to help me." The wind outside had picked up, howling around the truck. Through the windows, I could see papers and trash blowing across the parking lot, though there hadn't been any wind forecast for that night. I couldn't bring myself to say it. "Dead?" She finished for me. "I think so. I don't remember dying. I just remember being left behind." She reached out toward me, her fingers inches from my arm. "But you can see me. You stopped for me. That means you can help me find them." I jerked away from her, pressing myself against the driver's door. "I can't help you," I said. "I don't know how." Her face changed then, darkened with anger or desperation. I couldn't tell which. "You have to help me," she insisted, her voice taking on a strange, echoing quality. "I've been waiting for so long. Do you know what it's like to wait that long? To watch everyone else move on while you're stuck?" The windows of the truck began to fog over rapidly, frost forming in intricate patterns across the glass. Outside, the lights of the rest area flickered and dimmed. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers numb with cold and fear. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I can't." I practically fell out of the cab in my hurry to get away. The moment my feet hit the pavement, the wind died completely, leaving an eerie silence. I looked back into the truck, expecting to see her reaching for me or following me out. But the passenger seat was empty. I stood there for a good 5 minutes just staring at the empty seat, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the frost on the windows was real. The bone-deep cold that had seeped into my body was real. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the diner when it opened at 5 in the morning, drinking coffee and trying to convince myself I'd experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue. That's when I overheard 2 other truckers talking at the counter. "You drove the Phantom Highway last night? Brave man," one of them was saying. "Didn't have a choice. Dispatch routed me that way," the other replied. "Didn't see her, though, if that's what you're asking." "Who?" I found myself asking before I could stop myself. They both looked at me, surprised. Then the older of the 2 men shrugged. "Local legend. Story goes there's a woman who appears on that stretch of road. Wears white. They say she was camping with friends back in the 70s, and they left her behind for some reason. She died out there, exposure or something. Now she tries to get rides from truckers, always asking to be taken to find her friends." "After all these years," the other trucker added, shaking his head. "Imagine being that lost, that you're still looking for something you can never find." I didn't tell them what had happened to me. What would be the point? They'd either think I was crazy or they'd believe me, and I'm not sure which would be worse. I finished my route to Sacramento and headed home. I've been avoiding that stretch of highway ever since, taking detours that add hours to my trips. My dispatcher thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I catch glimpses of something white in my peripheral vision, standing just off the shoulder of whatever road I'm on. And occasionally, when the heater is blasting but the cab is still somehow freezing cold, I hear a woman's voice asking if I can help her find her friends. I don't think I'll ever be free of her, and I can't help but wonder if someday, when my time comes, I'll end up like those figures I saw on the road, lost, angry, stuck between worlds, forever searching for answers I'll never find. Story 16. I still get chills when I think about what happened last October. I've never told anyone the full story until now, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it, though I doubt anything will ever explain what I experienced that night. I was in my junior year at Westlake College, a small school tucked away in this tiny town called Millbrook. The campus is pretty, but it's surrounded by these dense forests and winding back roads that feel like they're swallowing you whole after dark. During the day, it's picturesque. At night, it's different. Midterms had been absolutely brutal. I'd been holed up in the library for what felt like a lifetime, surviving on vending machine coffee and granola bars. By Friday night, my brain was completely fried. I couldn't look at another textbook without wanting to scream. My roommate was hosting some party in our dorm to celebrate the end of exams, but the thought of being around people made me anxious. I just needed space to breathe. Around 11 that night, I grabbed my car keys and decided to go for a drive. It's something I've always done to clear my head. Just me, some music, and the open road. The October air was crisp, and there was this full moon hanging so low and bright in the sky that it almost felt artificial, like a spotlight. I remember thinking how perfect the lighting was, how everything was cast in this silvery glow. I took the main road out of town and then turned onto some of the back roads I'd discovered during previous drives. Cell service is spotty out there, but I knew the area well enough. Or at least, I thought I did. I'd been driving for maybe 40 minutes, windows cracked despite the chill, just letting my mind wander. The road I was on was particularly remote. Route 16, I think, though the signs are sparse out there. There were no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and that unnaturally bright moon overhead. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the road, arm outstretched, thumb up in the universal hitchhiker signal. My first instinct was to keep driving. I mean, who picks up hitchhikers these days, especially on a deserted road at almost midnight? But something made me slow down. Maybe it was because she looked so out of place. She was young, probably around my age, early 20s. She had this long, dark hair that hung past her shoulders, and she was wearing a thin jacket over what looked like a simple dress. Way too light for how cold it was getting at night. Her skin was really pale in my headlights, almost luminous. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was exhaustion from midterms making me reckless. Maybe it was the fact that I'm a woman too, and I'd hate to be stranded on a road like that. Whatever the reason, I pulled over. I rolled down my passenger window instead of just opening the door. Not completely stupid, I guess. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. She approached my car slowly. Up close, there was something off about her. Not threatening, just strange. Her eyes seemed to reflect the moonlight in a way that was almost too bright. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need a ride home," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It's not far from here." Against every safety lesson I've ever been taught, I unlocked the door. "Get in. It's freezing out there." She slid into the passenger seat with barely a sound. No backpack, no purse, nothing. Just herself. She didn't even seem to be shivering despite the thin clothes. "Thank you," she said, looking straight ahead. "It's been a while since someone stopped." I pulled back onto the road, turning down the radio that had been keeping me company. "So, where am I taking you?" "Just up ahead," she said vaguely. "I'll direct you." We drove in silence for a bit. I tried making conversation, asked if she was from around here, if she needed to call anyone. "I used to be," she replied to my first question. "I haven't been home in a long time." When I asked her name, she just smiled and pointed to a turn up ahead. "Take that road." The turn led us onto an even narrower road, barely wide enough for my compact car. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching over the road like fingers. I started to feel uneasy, but told myself I was just being paranoid. "Just a little further," she kept saying whenever I asked how much longer. We must have driven another 15 minutes, taking turns onto progressively smaller roads. I was completely lost by this point, with no idea how to get back to the main road. My phone showed no service, and the gas gauge was dipping lower than I was comfortable with. Finally, she pointed to a gap in the trees. "There, that's my home." I turned where she indicated, and my headlights illuminated a narrow dirt driveway leading to a house set back from the road. It was an old 2-story farmhouse, the kind that might have been charming once, but now just looked forgotten. The white paint was peeling, some of the windows were boarded up, and the porch sagged in the middle like it might collapse at any moment. "This is where you live?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. She nodded, a strange smile playing on her lips. "It's been in my family for generations." I pulled up to the end of the driveway and put the car in park, but kept the engine running. The house looked abandoned. There were no lights on, no car parked outside, no sign that anyone had lived there for years. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked. "It doesn't look like anyone's home." "They're waiting for me," she said, opening the door. "Thank you for bringing me home. I've been trying to get back for so long." Before I could say anything else, she slipped out of the car and walked toward the house. I watched as she climbed the steps to the porch, her movements oddly graceful. She didn't look back before disappearing into the shadows of the doorway. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, a growing sense of unease spreading through me. Something wasn't right. The house looked completely abandoned. I couldn't just leave her there, could I? After debating with myself, I turned off the engine, grabbed my phone, useless as it was without service, and got out of the car. The night air hit me like a physical force, colder than it had been before. The moonlight cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, and the trees surrounding the property seemed to watch me as I approached the house. "Hello?" I called out as I climbed the creaking porch steps. "Are you okay in there?" No answer. The front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, wincing at the loud creak of the hinges. "Hello? It's Emily from the car. I just wanted to make sure you're all right." The interior of the house was pitch black. I used my phone's flashlight to illuminate the space, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The house was empty, not just unoccupied, but completely abandoned. Dust covered everything: the floor, the few pieces of broken furniture that remained, the staircase leading to the second floor. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and there were dead leaves scattered across the floor that had blown in from broken windows. This place hadn't been lived in for decades. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking now. "Where are you?" I moved deeper into the house, my footprints clearly visible in the thick layer of dust. There were no other footprints, not a single one. It was as if the woman had never entered the house at all. I was about to leave, my heart pounding in my chest, when something caught my eye. On the mantel above a long dead fireplace sat a single framed photograph, somehow less dusty than everything else. I approached it cautiously, lifting it to examine it in the beam of my flashlight. The photograph was old, sepia-toned and faded. It showed a family standing in front of the house, the same house but newer, well-maintained. A man, a woman, and between them, a young woman with long dark hair wearing a simple dress. The same woman I had given a ride to. The photo was dated 1948. I dropped the frame, barely registering the sound of glass shattering as it hit the floor. I ran for the door, tripping over my own feet in my panic to get out of there. I burst out onto the porch and didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys with shaking hands. As I finally got the door open and practically fell into the driver's seat, I glanced at my rearview mirror to back out. She was there, in my back seat. But she was different. Her skin was no longer just pale. It was translucent, almost glowing in the darkness. I could see the outline of the seat through her face. Her eyes were hollow, yet somehow still reflecting the moonlight. "Thank you for bringing me home," she whispered, her voice sounding like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I've been trying to get back for so long," I screamed, spinning around to face the back seat, but it was empty, completely empty. I whipped back around, threw the car into reverse, and peeled out of that driveway so fast I'm surprised I didn't crash. I drove through the night, taking random turns until I somehow found my way back to a main road and then back to campus. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. When I finally worked up the courage to look up the address of that house, after several people helped me figure out where I'd been, I found an old news article. In 1948, a young woman named Margaret had gone missing while walking home from a dance. Her body was never found, but her family never gave up hope that she'd return home one day. The house had been abandoned in the 1970s after the last of her family passed away. There were rumors that it was haunted, that people sometimes saw a young woman with long, dark hair walking along the nearby roads at night. I've avoided that part of town ever since. I take different routes when I drive now, even if it means going miles out of my way. I've told my friends I had a bad experience on those back roads, but I've never told anyone the full story until now. Sometimes, on windy nights when I'm alone in my room, I swear I can hear a soft voice thanking me for the ride home. And occasionally, just occasionally, when I glance in my rearview mirror while driving at night, I think I see someone sitting in my back seat, just for a split second. I don't know if I helped her find peace, or if I just became another chapter in her endless search for home. But I know what I saw, what I experienced, and I know I'll never pick up another hitchhiker as long as I live. Story 17. I've been driving trucks for almost 23 years now. Cross-country hauls, regional routes, you name it, I've probably driven it. When you spend that much time on the road, you develop a certain rhythm, a sixth sense about things. You learn which stops have the best coffee, which highways to avoid during certain times of the year, and how to navigate through the worst weather conditions. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what happened last October on Highway 97 in Oregon. I was making a standard electronics delivery from Northern California up to Seattle. Nothing special about the cargo, just the usual pallets of computer components bound for some tech warehouse. I'd made this run dozens of times before, so I knew the route like the back of my hand. Highway 97 cuts through central Oregon, beautiful country, but desolate in parts, especially at night. It was around midnight when I started feeling the fatigue setting in. I'd been pushing hard to make good time, and my eyes were getting heavy. Any trucker will tell you that's when you need to pull over, no matter what. Driving tired is a death sentence in this line of work. I remembered there being a truck stop somewhere up ahead. Nothing fancy, just a place to grab some coffee and maybe catch a quick nap in the cab. The night was unusually dark, no moon, and the stars were hidden behind a blanket of clouds. The highway stretched out ahead of me, empty except for my headlights cutting through the darkness. My dashboard clock read 12:17 when I saw the lights of what looked like a truck stop up ahead on the right. I didn't recall one being exactly at this spot, but I figured maybe I'd just forgotten or they'd built a new one since my last run-through. I signaled and pulled off the highway, guiding my rig into what appeared to be a fairly standard truck stop. Gas pumps out front, a small diner-style building with windows lit up, and a large parking area for trucks. As I pulled in, I noticed several other trucks already parked in the lot. That wasn't unusual, but something about them caught my attention. They all looked dusty. Not just road, dust, but like they'd been sitting there for a long time. Some of the models looked older too, like trucks from the 80s or 90s. I chalked it up to my tired mind playing tricks on me and pulled into an empty spot. After shutting down my engine, I sat there for a minute, rubbing my eyes and stretching. That's when I realized how quiet it was. Usually, a truck stop at night has some life to it. The distant hum of refrigeration units on sleeper cabs, maybe some country music drifting from the diner, the occasional door slamming or engine starting up. But this place was dead silent. No sound but the cooling tick of my own engine. I needed that coffee badly, so I climbed down from my cab and headed toward the diner. The air felt strange, heavy and still, with an odd metallic smell I couldn't quite place. As I approached the diner, I noticed the lights were dimmer than they'd appeared from the highway. Not bright and inviting like most truck stop diners, but a sickly yellow glow that barely penetrated the windows. I pushed open the door, and a little bell jingled above me. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. The place looked like any standard truck stop diner, counter with stools, booths along the windows, menu boards above the kitchen pass-through. But something was immediately wrong. There was food on almost every table, plates of half-eaten meals, cups of coffee, some still with steam rising from them. But no people, not a single person at any of the tables or behind the counter. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded flat, like the air was absorbing the sound. No answer. I walked further in, looking around for any sign of staff or customers. That's when I noticed the details that made my skin crawl. The food on the plates looked wrong. Not spoiled exactly, but not fresh either. Like it was frozen in time, halfway between fresh and rotten. And the coffee in the cups, the steam wasn't actually moving. It just hung there, like a photograph of steam rather than the real thing. Then I heard it. Whispers. Faint at first, like someone was having a hushed conversation in another room. But there was no other room, just the open diner space and what I assumed was the kitchen behind the counter. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't make out any words, just the sound of urgent, frightened murmuring. "Is anybody here?" I called again, louder this time. The whispers stopped abruptly, then started again, more intense. My heart was hammering in my chest now. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but some morbid curiosity kept me moving forward. That's when I noticed a figure sitting in the farthest booth, back to the window. From where I stood, it looked like a man in typical trucker clothes, flannel shirt, baseball cap. He was completely motionless. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hey buddy, you know what's going on here?" No response, no movement. As I got closer, I could see it was definitely a man, slumped slightly forward as if looking down at his plate. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, that same unnaturally still steam rising from it. I was about 10 feet away when something made me glance at the window beside his booth. That's when I saw it, the reflection. In the dark glass of the window, I could see not the seated figure that was actually there, but a standing one. The reflection showed the same man, but he was standing, his face pressed against the glass from the inside, eyes wide open in what could only be described as a silent scream. His hands were splayed against the window too, like he was trying to push through it. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over an empty chair. The seated figure remained motionless, but in the reflection, the standing figure's eyes followed me, its mouth opening wider in that silent scream. The whispers grew louder, becoming a chorus of desperate, unintelligible pleas. I backed away, unable to tear my eyes from that horrible reflection. When I finally managed to look away, I noticed something else. Every booth in the diner had someone sitting in it. Figures I somehow hadn't seen when I first walked in, all perfectly still, all facing away from me. I turned and ran. I hit the door at full speed, bursting out into the parking lot. The night air felt thick, hard to breathe. I gulped it down anyway as I sprinted toward my truck. That's when I noticed the other trucks in the lot. Each one had a figure sitting in the driver's seat, shadowy outlines visible through the windshields. And as I watched in horror, one by one, they all turned to face me. I couldn't see their features clearly, just dark silhouettes, but I felt their eyes on me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my key into the door of my cab. I finally managed to wrench it open and climbed in, slamming and locking the door behind me. I fired up the engine, threw it into gear, and peeled out of that parking lot like the devil himself was chasing me. In my side mirrors, I could see the figures emerging from their trucks, standing in the lot, watching me go. I drove like a madman, not caring about speed limits or regulations. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. The whispers followed me for miles, like they'd gotten inside my head and made a home there. I drove until I hit the next town, a small place called Bend. I pulled into a well-lit truck stop with plenty of normal activity, drivers walking around, music playing from the diner, the usual nighttime truck stop buzz. I parked and just sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. I must have fallen asleep in my cab because I woke up the next morning to bright sunlight and the sounds of trucks coming and going. I went inside, ordered the biggest coffee they had, and asked the waitress about truck stops on Highway 97. "There's this one," she said, "and then nothing until you hit Redmond, about 16 miles north." "What about the one about 30 miles south of here?" I asked. "Small place, kind of isolated?" She looked at me strangely. "There's no truck stop there, honey. Just empty land for miles." I didn't believe her. After breakfast, I pulled out my road atlas and checked. She was right. There was no truck stop marked where I'd stopped last night. I even used the diner's Wi-Fi to check online maps. Nothing. Later that day, I mentioned my experience to another driver at the fuel pumps. He gave me a long look before saying, "You saw the ghost stop, didn't you?" Turns out I wasn't the first. There were stories, whispered legends among long-haul drivers about phantom truck stops that appear only to certain travelers, usually those who are exhausted or driving alone late at night. Places that exist outside of normal reality, populated by the souls of drivers who never made it to their destinations. I delivered my load to Seattle the next day, but something had changed. The whispers never fully left my mind. They're quieter now, but still there, especially when I'm driving at night. I've changed my routes to avoid Highway 97 entirely. I never drive past midnight anymore, and I plan my stops carefully, always making sure I'm at a busy, well-lit location before dark. I don't know what that place was, or why I was allowed to leave when others clearly weren't. Sometimes I wonder if I really did leave, or if some part of me is still there, sitting motionless in a booth while my reflection screams silently against the glass. All I know is that place shouldn't exist, but it does, somewhere between reality and nightmare. And for those of us who've seen it, the road will never feel safe again. Story 18. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 19 years. You see some weird shit on the road, especially during those overnight hauls when your eyes get heavy and the white lines start to hypnotize you. But what happened to me on Highway 491 in New Mexico last month wasn't my imagination. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself I was just tired, but I know what I saw. For those who don't know, Highway 491 used to be Route 666, nicknamed the Devil's Highway. They changed the number years ago because people kept stealing the 666 signs, but locals still call it by the old name. I never put much stock in ghost stories or superstitions. 19 years on the road will make you practical that way. But I'm not the same person I was before that night. I was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Portland down to Gallup. It was a rush job with a tight deadline, which meant driving through the night. I've done the route dozens of times and know every curve, every dip in that road. The stretch through New Mexico is particularly lonely. Miles of empty desert with nothing but scrub brush and the occasional coyote. Cell reception is spotty at best, and sometimes the only company you have is your CB radio, though even that gets pretty quiet after midnight. I'd been driving for about 14 hours straight, with only short breaks to use the bathroom and grab coffee. By 2:30 in the morning, I was in that zone where my body was on autopilot. My rig's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating maybe 100 feet of road ahead with nothing but blackness beyond. The moon was just a sliver that night, and the stars seemed unusually dim. I remember glancing at my dashboard clock, 2:37 exactly, when I first saw her. At first, it was just a shape on the roadside, something pale against the darkness. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman standing perfectly still at the edge of the asphalt. She wasn't trying to hitchhike, wasn't waving for help. She was just standing there, back to the road, facing the desert. Her dress was old-fashioned, long and flowing, and it fluttered slightly even though I don't remember there being any wind. Something about her made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was how still she was. Maybe it was the fact that we were at least 30 miles from the nearest town, in the middle of nowhere, at 2:30 in the morning. Who the hell just stands on the side of a highway in the middle of the night? I had a split second to decide whether to stop, and something deep in my gut screamed at me to keep going. I've picked up hitchhikers before, helped stranded motorists. That's what we truckers do. But that night, I pressed my foot down a little harder on the gas and drove past her. I couldn't see her face as I passed. She never turned around, never acknowledged my 18-wheeler roaring by just feet away from her. In my side mirror, I could see her still standing there, motionless, getting smaller as I drove away. The guilt hit me about 5 miles down the road. What if she was in trouble? What if her car had broken down and she was in shock? What kind of person was I to leave someone stranded in the middle of nowhere? I pulled over at a wide spot in the road and sat there for a few minutes, arguing with myself. The rational part of my brain kept saying, something isn't right about this. But I couldn't just leave her there. I've got a daughter about that age. What if it was her stranded on some highway? I turned my rig around and headed back. It took me about 7 minutes to get back to where I'd seen her. I drove slowly, scanning the roadside, but there was nothing. No woman, no broken down vehicle, nothing but empty desert on both sides of the highway. I even stopped and got out, shining my flashlight around, calling out. The silence was absolute, that deep desert silence that seems to swallow sound. After a few minutes, I got back in my truck, feeling unsettled but also relieved. Maybe she'd gotten picked up by another driver. Maybe I'd imagined her. I continued south, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I turned up the radio to keep myself alert and focused on making good time. The highway was completely empty. I hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. I was approaching mile marker 173 when my CB radio, which had been silent for hours, suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice, gravelly, male, hard to make out. Saw her, didn't you? I picked up the handset. Come again? Who's out there? More static, then. Back at mile marker 168. You saw her. A chill ran through me. That was exactly where I'd seen the woman. Who is this? I asked. How do you know what I saw? The voice came back, clearer this time. Listen to me carefully, driver. If you see her again, don't stop. Whatever you do, just don't let her in. Let her in where? Who is she? I asked, but there was no response, just empty static. I tried again. This isn't funny. Who am I talking to? Nothing. I checked my mirrors, looking for headlights behind me, wondering if another trucker was messing with me. But the road was empty in both directions. I switched channels on the CB, but heard nothing but static. By now, my skin was crawling. I'm not a superstitious man, but something about that voice, knowing exactly where I'd seen the woman, had me rattled. I decided to push through to the next truck stop, about 40 miles ahead. The next 20 minutes passed uneventfully. I was starting to calm down, telling myself I was overtired and letting my imagination run wild. That's when I saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road. She appeared so suddenly that I had to slam on my brakes. My cargo shifted behind me, and I felt my trailer starting to jackknife. Instinct kicked in, and I managed to straighten out, but not before skidding to a stop about 15 feet from where she stood. My high beams illuminated her fully now. Her dress wasn't just old-fashioned. It was tattered, dirty, like she'd been dragging it through the desert for days. Her hair was tangled and hung down over her face, but not enough to hide her eyes, which reflected my headlights like an animal's. What struck me most wasn't how she got there or why she was there, but how wrong she looked. It's hard to explain, but she didn't move right. Have you ever seen those nature documentaries where insects disguise themselves as other creatures? That's what she reminded me of. Something wearing the skin of a person, but not quite getting it right. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, and she just stared at me. Then, slowly, she raised her arm and pointed at my passenger door. I couldn't hear her. My windows were up, and the engine was running, but I could see her mouth moving. She wanted me to let her in. The CB radio warning echoed in my head. Just don't let her in. I hit the door locks. Click. I wasn't getting out, and she wasn't getting in. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield, and I realized how cold it had gotten in the cab. Then she started walking toward my truck. Her movements were wrong, jerky, like someone had cut frames out of a film. 1 second she was in the middle of the road, the next she was at the front of my truck, then suddenly she was outside my passenger door. Up close, I could see her face clearly for the first time. Her skin was gray and dry like old paper. Her eyes were too big, too round, and her mouth, Jesus, her mouth was all wrong. It stretched too wide across her face when she smiled at me through the window. She tapped on the glass with a long, dirty fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. Then she mouthed something again. Even though I couldn't hear her, somehow I understood. Let me in. I shook my head. My throat was so dry I couldn't speak. Her face changed then. The fake human expression dropped away, and what I saw instead made me recoil across the seat. Her jaw seemed to unhinge, stretching downward in a way no human jaw could, revealing rows of teeth like needles. She slammed her palm against the window, hard enough that I thought the glass might crack. I could see now that her hand wasn't right either. The fingers were too long, too thin, with an extra joint in each. I fumbled for the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The engine roared to life, and I threw the truck into gear, ready to run her down if I had to. But when I looked back at the passenger window, she was gone. I hit the gas anyway, tires spinning on the asphalt before catching. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see her running after the truck or somehow appearing in the cab beside me. About a half-mile down the road, I spotted her again, standing on the shoulder, watching my truck pass. Then again, 2 miles later. It was impossible for her to have covered that distance on foot in that time, but there she was, always standing still, always watching. The last time I saw her, she was walking into the desert, away from the highway. I watched in my mirror until her pale figure disappeared into the darkness. I drove straight through to Gallup without stopping, breaking every speed limit along the way. When I finally pulled into a truck stop, the sun was coming up. I sat in my cab for a long time, trying to process what had happened. I've been back on that highway since then, had to for work, but only during daylight hours. I've asked other truckers if they've seen her, but most just laugh it off or tell me I was dreaming. A few get real quiet though and change the subject. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, my CB will pick up random static, and I swear I can hear that gravelly voice again, repeating the same warning, just don't let her in. I don't know what would have happened if I'd opened that door. I don't want to know, but sometimes in my dreams, I do open it. And what comes in isn't a woman at all. I still drive that route when I have to, but I never stop on Highway 491 anymore. And if you're ever driving through New Mexico in the dead of night and see a woman on the side of the road, for God's sake, keep driving. And whatever you do, don't let her in.